Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 201. Markandeya said, O king, after the death of Ikshvaku, a highly virtuous king of the name of Sasada, ascending the throne of Ayodhya, ruled this earth. And from Sasada was descended Kurukshetra of great energy. And Kurukshetra had a son of name Aninas. And Aninas had a son named Prithu, and Prithu had a son named Viswagaswa, and from Viswagaswa sprang Adri, and from Adri sprang Uvanaswa, and from Uvanaswa sprang Sravasta, and it was by this Sravasta that the city called Sravasti was built, and from Sravasta was descended Vrihadaswa, and from Vrihadaswa sprang Kuvalaswa, and Kuvalaswa had 21,000 sons, and all these sons were fierce and powerful and skilled in learning, and Kuvalaswa excelled his father in every quality. And when the time came, his father Vrihadaswa installed him the brave and highly virtuous Kuvalaswa on the throne. And having thus made over the royal dignity to his son, that slayer of foes King Vrihadaswa of great intelligence retired into the woods for asceticism. Markandeya continued, O king, when the royal sage Vrihadaswa was about to retire into the woods, that best of Brahmanas, Uttanka, heard of it. And Uttanka, who was possessed of great energy and immeasurable soul, approached that foremost of all wielders of weapons and best of men. And approaching him, the rishis began to persuade him to give up asceticism. And Uttanka said, O king, to protect the people is thy duty. It behoveth thee to do that duty of thine. Let us be free from all anxiety through thy grace. Possessed as thou art of a great soul, protected by thee, the earth will be freed from all dangers. Therefore, it behoveth thee not to retire into the woods. Great merit attaches to the act of protecting people in this world. Such merit can never be acquired in the woods. Let not thy heart, therefore, turn to this course. The merit, great king, that was acquired in days of old by great royal sages by protecting their subjects was so great that nothing equal to it could be seen. The king should always protect his subjects. It behoveth thee, therefore, to protect thy people. O Lord of the earth, I cannot, at present, perform my ascetic devotions peacefully. Close to my asylum there is a sea of sands known by the name of Ujjalaka. And it occupies a level country and is without any water. And it extends many yojanas in length and breadth, and in that desert dwells a chief of the Dandavas called Dundu by name. And Dundu is the son of Madhu and Kaitaba, and is fierce and terrible and possessed of great prowess. And endued with immeasurable energy, that Danava, O king, dwelleth under the ground, and, O king, it behoveth thee to retire into the woods, having first slain that Asura. That Asura is now lying still in the observance of an ascetic penance of great austerity, and, O king, the object he hath in view is sovereignty over the celestials as also of the three worlds. And, O king, having obtained a boon from the grandsire of all creatures, that Asura hath become incapable of being slain by the gods and Daityas and Rakshasas and Gandharvas. Slay thou him, O king, and blessed be thou, and let not thy heart turn to any other course. By slaying him thou wilt without doubt achieve a great thing, and thou wilt also obtain eternal and undying fame. And O king, when at the end of every year that wicked Asura lying covered with sands wakes up and begins to breathe, then the whole earth with her mountains, forests, and woods begins to tremble. And his breath riseth up clouds of sands, and shroudeth the very sun, and for 7 days continually the earth tremble all over, and sparks and flames of fire mixed with smoke spread far around, and for all this, O king, I cannot rest in peace in my asylum. Slay thou him, O king, for the good of the world. Indeed, when that Asura is slain, the triple world will be in peace and happiness. That thou art competent, O king, to slay that Asura, I fully believe. Thy energy will be enhanced by Vishnu with the addition of his own. In days of old, O king, Vishnu gave this boon that the king who should slay this fierce and great Asura would be pervaded by the invincible energy of Vishnu himself. Bearing that invincible Vaishnava energy in thyself, slay thou, O great king, that Daitya of fierce prowess. Possessed as Dundu is of mighty energy, no one, O king, that is endued with small energy himself will be capable of consuming him, even if he were to strive for 100 years. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 202. Markandeya said, thus addressed by Uttamka, that unvanquished royal sage, with joined hands, O thou foremost of the Kuru race, replied unto Uttamka, saying, this visit of thine, O Brahmana, will not be in vain. This my son, O Holy One, known by the name of Kuvalaswa, is endued with steadiness and activity. In prowess also he is unequaled on earth. Without doubt he will accomplish all this that is agreeable to thee, aided by all his brave sons, endued with arms like unto iron maces. Give me leave to retire, O Brahmana, for I have now given up my weapons. Thus addressed by the king, that Muni of immeasurable energy replied unto him, saying, so be it. And the royal sage Vradaswa then, having commended his son to obey the behest of the high-souled Uttamka, saying, let it be done by thee, himself retired into an excellent forest. Yudhishthira said, O Holy One, O thou possessed of the wealth of asceticism, who was this Daitya of great energy? Whose son and whose grandson was he? I desire to know all this, O thou possessed of the wealth of asceticism. I never heard of this mighty Daitya before. I desire to know all this truly, O Holy One, and with all particulars in detail, O thou of great wisdom and ascetic wealth. Markandeya said, O monarch, know everything as it happened, O ruler of men, as I narrate the particulars truly, O thou of great wisdom. When the world became one broad expanse of water and creatures mobile and immobile were destroyed, when, O bull of the Bharata race, the entire creation came to its end. He who is the source and creator of the universe, viz., the eternal and unfading Vishnu, he who is called by Munis crowned with ascetic success as the supreme lord of the universe, that being of great holiness, then lay in yoga sleep on the wide hood of the snake Sesha of immeasurable energy, and the creator of the universe, that highly blessed and holy Hari, knowing no deterioration, lay on the hood of that snake encircling the whole earth, and as the deity lay asleep on that bed, a lotus, endued with great beauty and effulgence equal unto that of the sun, sprang from his navel. And from that lotus possessed of effulgence like unto the sun's, sprang the grandsire Brahma, that lord of the worlds, who is the four Vedas, who hath four forms and four faces, who is invincible in consequence of his own energy, and who is endued with mighty strength and great prowess, and as the Lord Hari of wondrous frame, possessed of great luster, and decked with a crown and the Kaustubha gem, and attired in purple silk, lay stretched for many a yojana on that excellent bed furnished by the hood of the snake itself, extending far and wide, blazing, O king, in his beauty and the luster of his own body like 1,000 suns concentrated in one mass. He was beheld some time after by two Danavas of great prowess named Madhu and Kaitaba, and beholding Hari, in that posture, and the grandsire with eyes like lotus leaves seated on that lotus, both Madhu and Kaitaba wondered much, and they began to terrify and alarm Brahma of immeasurable prowess, and the illustrious Brahma, alarmed by their continued exertions, trembled on his seat, and at his trembling the stalk of the lotus on which he was seated began to tremble, and when the lotus stalk trembled, Kesava awoke. And awakened from his slumber, Govinda beheld those Danavas of mighty energy, and beholding them the deity said unto them, Welcome, ye mighty ones. I am gratified with you. Therefore, I will grant you excellent boons. And thereupon both those proud and mighty Danavas, O king, laughingly replied unto Hrishikesa, saying, Ask boons of us, O divine one. O thou that art the supreme deity, we are disposed to grant thee a boon. Indeed, we will grant thee a boon. Therefore, ask thou of us anything that cometh to thy mind. Thus addressed by them the Holy One spoke, Ye brave ones, I will accept a boon from you. There is a boon that I desire. Both of you are possessed of mighty energy. There is no male person like unto any of you. O ye of unbaffled prowess, submit ye to be slain by me. Even that is what I desire to accomplish for the good of the world. Hearing these words of the deity, both Madhu and Kaitaba said, We have never before spoken in untruth, no, not even in jest. What shall we say of other occasions? O thou foremost of male beings, know that we have ever been firm in truth and morality. In strength, in forms, in beauty, in virtue, in asceticism, in charity, in behavior, in goodness, in self-control, there is no one equal unto either of us. A great danger, O Kesava, hath approached us. Accomplish thou, therefore, what thou hast said. No one can prevail over time. But, O Lord, there is one thing that we desire to be done by thee. O thou best and foremost of all deities, thou must slay us at a spot that is absolutely uncovered. And, O thou of excellent eyes, we also desire to become thy sons. This is the boon that we desire. Know then, O chief of the gods. Let not that, O deity, be false which thou hadst at first promised to us. The Holy One then replied unto them, saying, Yes, I will do as ye desire. Everything will be as ye wish. Markandeya continued, Then Govinda began to reflect, but uncovered space found he none, and when he could not discover any spot that was uncovered on earth or in the sky, that foremost deity then beheld his thighs to be absolutely uncovered. And there, O king, the illustrious deity cut off the heads of Madhu and Kaitaba with his keen-edged discus. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 203. Markandeya said, The illustrious Dandu, O king, was the son of Madhu and Kaitaba, and possessed of great energy and prowess. He underwent ascetic penances of great austerity, and he stood erect on one leg and reduced his body to a mass of only veins and arteries, and Brahma, gratified with him, gave him a boon. And the boon he had asked of the Lord Prajapati was in these words, Let no one among the gods, the Danavas, the Rakshas, the snakes, the Gandharvas, and the Rakshasas be capable of slaying me. Even this is the boon that I ask of thee. And the grandsire replied unto him, saying, Let it be as thou wishest. Go thy way. And thus addressed by the grandsire, the Danava placed the feet of the deity on his head, and having thus touched with reverence the deity's feet, he went away, and possessed of mighty energy and prowess. Dandu, having obtained the boon, hastily approached Vishnu, remembering the death of his father at the hands of that deity, and the wrathful Dandu, having vanquished the gods with the Gandharvas, began to distress all the celestials with Vishnu at their head. And at last, O bull of the Bharata race, that wicked-souled Asura, arriving at a sea of sands known by the name of Ujjalaka, began to distress to the utmost of his might the asylum of Utanka. And endued with fierce energy, Dandu, the son of Madhu and Kaitaba, lay in his subterranean cave underneath the sands in the observance of fierce ascetic and severe austerities, with the object of destroying the triple world. And while the Asura lay breathing near the asylum of Utanka, that Rishi possessed of the splendor of fire, King Kwalaswa with his troops, accompanied by the Brahmana Utanka, as also by all his sons, set out for that region, O bull of the Bharata race. And after that grinder of foes, the royal Kuvalaswa had set out, accompanied by his 21,000 sons, all of whom were exceedingly powerful. The illustrious Lord Vishnu filled him with his own energy at the command of Utanka, and impelled by the desire of benefiting the triple world. And while that invincible hero was proceeding on his way, and loud voice was heard in the sky repeating the words, This fortunate and unslayable one will become the destroyer of Dandu today. And the gods began to shower upon him celestial flowers. And the celestial kettle drums began to sound their music, although none played upon them. And during the march of that wise one, cool breezes began to blow, and the chief of the celestials poured gentle showers, wetting the dust on the roads. And, O Yudhishthira, the cars of the celestials could be seen high over the spot where the mighty Asura Dandu was. The gods and Gandharvas and great rishis, urged by curiosity, came there to behold the encounter between Dandu and Kuvalaswa. And, O thou of the Kuru race, filled by Narayana with his own energy, King Kuvalaswa, aided by his sons, soon surrounded that sea of sands, and the king ordered that wilderness to be excavated. And after the king's sons had excavated that sea of sands for 7 days, they could see the mighty Asura Dandu. And, O bull of the Bharata race, the huge body of that Asura lay within those sands, effulgent in its own energy like the sun himself. And Dandu, O king, was lying covering the western region of the desert, and surrounded on all sides by the sons of Kuvalaswa. The Danava was assaulted with sharp-pointed shafts and maces, and heavy and short clubs, and axes and clubs, with iron spikes and darts and bright and keen-edged swords. And thus assaulted, the mighty Danava rose from his recumbent posture in wrath. And enraged, the Asura began to swallow those various weapons that were hurled at him, and he vomited from his mouth fiery flames like unto those of the fire called Samvarta that appeareth at the end of the Yuga. And by those flames of his, the Asura consumed all the sons of the king. And, O tiger among men, like the Lord Kapila of old consuming the sons of King Sagara, the infuriated Asura, overwhelming the triple world with the flames vomited from his mouth, achieved that wonderful feat in a moment. And, O thou best of the Bharatas, when all those sons of King Kuvalaswa were consumed by the fire emitted by the Asura in wrath, the monarch, possessed as he was of mighty energy, then approached the Danava who, like unto a second Kumbhakarna of mighty energy, had come to the encounter after waking from his slumbers. From the body of the king, O monarch, then began to flow a mighty and copious stream of water, and that stream soon extinguished, O king, the fiery flames emitted by the Asura. And, O great king, the royal Kuvalaswa, filled with yoga force, having extinguished those flames by the water that issued from his body, consumed that Daigya of wicked prowess with the celebrated weapon called Brahma for relieving the triple world of its fears, and the royal sage Kuvalaswa, having consumed that great Asura, that foe of the celestials and slayer of all enemies, by means of that weapon became like unto a second chief of the triple world, and the high-souled king Kuvalaswa having slain the Asura Dundu, became from that time known by the name of Dundhumara, and from that time he came to be regarded as invincible in battle, and the gods and the great rishis who had come to witness that encounter were so far gratified with him that they addressed him saying, "Ask thou a boon of us." And thus solicited by the gods, the king bowed to them and filled with joy, the king said unto them, with joined hands these words, "Let me be always able to give wealth unto superior Brahmanas. Let me be invincible as regards all foes. Let there be friendship between myself and Vishnu. Let me have no ill feeling towards any creature. Let my heart always turn to virtue. And let me, finally, dwell in heaven forever." And the gods and the rishis and Utanka, hearing this, were exceedingly gratified, and all of them said, "Let it be as thou wishest." And, O king, having also blessed him with many other speeches, the gods and the great rishis then went away to their respective abodes. And, O Yudhishthira, after the slaughter of all his sons, King Kuvalaswa had still 3 sons left, and, O thou of the Bharata race, they were called Dridaswa and Kapilaswa and Chandraswa. It is from them, O king, that the illustrious line of kings belonging to Ikshvaku's race, all possessed of immeasurable prowess, hath sprung. It was thus, O best of king, that great Daigya of the name Dundu, the son of Madhu and Kaitaba, was slain by Kuvalaswa, and it was for this also that king came to be called by the name of Dundhumara. And indeed, the name he assumed was no empty one, but was literally true. I have now told thee all that thou hadst asked me, viz., all about that person in consequence of whose act the story of Dundu's death hath become famous. He that listeneth to this holy history connected with the glory of Vishnu becometh virtuous and obtaineth children. By listening to this story on particular lunations, one becometh blessed with long life and great good fortune. And freed from every anxiety one saith to have any fear of diseases. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 204. Vaisampayana said, "O thou foremost of the Bharata race, King Yudhishthira then asked the illustrious Markandeya a difficult question about morality, saying, I desire to hear, O Holy One, about the high and excellent virtue of women. I desire to hear from thee, O Brahmana, discourse about the subtle truths of morality. O regenerate Rishi, O best of men, the sun, the moon, the wind, the earth, the fire, the father, the mother, the preceptor, these and other objects ordained by the gods, appear to us as deities embodied. All these that are reverend ones are worthy of our best regard. So also is the woman who adoreth one Lord. The worship that chaste wives offer unto their husbands appeareth to me to be fraught with great difficulty. O adorable one, it behoveth thee to discourse to us of the high and excellent virtue of chaste wives who restraining all their senses and keeping their hearts under complete control regard their husbands as veritable gods. O holy and adorable one, all this appears to me to be exceedingly difficult of accomplishment. O regenerate one, the worship that sons offer to their mothers and fathers, and that wives offer to their husbands, both seem to me to be highly difficult. I do not behold anything that is more difficult than the severe virtue of chaste women. O Brahmana, the duties that women of good behavior discharge with care and the conduct that is pursued by good sons towards their fathers and mothers appear to me to be most difficult of performance. Those women that are each devoted to but one Lord, they that always speak the truth, they that undergo a period of gestation for full 10 months, there is nothing, O Brahmana, that is more difficult than that is done by these. O worshipful one, women bring forth their offspring with great hazard to themselves and great pain, and rear their children, O bull, among Brahmanas, with great affection. Those persons also who, being always engaged in acts of cruelty and thereby incurring general hatred, succeed yet in doing their duties accomplish what, in my opinion, is exceedingly difficult. O regenerate one, tell me the truths of the duties of the Kshatriya order. It is difficult, O twice-born one, for those high-souled ones to acquire virtue who by the duties of their order are obliged to do what is cruel. O Holy One, thou art capable of answering all questions. I desire to hear thee discourse on all this. O thou foremost of Bhriga's race, I desire to listen to all this, waiting respectfully on thee, O thou of excellent vows. Markandeya said, O thou foremost of the Bharata race, I will discourse to thee on all this truly, however difficult of answer thy question may be. Listen to me, therefore, as I speak unto thee. Some regard the mother as superior, and some the father. The mother, however, that bringeth forth, and some the father. The mother, however, that bringeth forth and reareth up offspring, what is more difficult? Fathers also, by ascetic penances, by worship of the gods, by adorations addressed to them, by bearing cold and heat, by incantations and other means desire to have children. And having by these painful expedients obtained children that are so difficult of acquisition, they then, O hero, are always anxious about the future of their sons, and, O Bharata, both the father and the mother desire to see in their sons fame and achievements and prosperity and offspring and virtue. That son is virtuous who realizes these hopes of his parents. And, O great king, that son with whom the father and the mother are gratified, achieveth eternal fame and eternal virtue both here and thereafter. As regards women again, neither sacrifice nor shraddhas nor fasts are of any efficacy. By serving their husbands only they can win heaven. O king, O Yudhishthira, remembering this alone, listen thou with attention to the duties of chaste women. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 205. Markandeya said, There was, O Bharata, a virtuous ascetic of the name of Kausika, and endued with wealth of asceticism and devoted to the study of the Vedas. He was a very superior Brahmana, and that best of Brahmanas studied all the Vedas with the Angas and the Upanishads, and one day he was reciting the Vedas at the foot of a tree, and at that time there sat on the top of that tree a female crane, and that she-crane happened at that time to befoul the Brahmana's body, and beholding that crane, the Brahmana became very angry and thought of doing her an injury, and as the Brahmana cast his angry glances upon the crane and thought also of doing her an injury, she fell down on the ground, and beholding the crane thus fallen from the tree and insensible in death, the Brahmana was much moved by pity, and the regenerate one began to lament for the dead crane, saying, Alas, I have done a bad deed, urged by anger and malice. Markandeya continued, having repeated these words many times, that learned Brahmana entered a village for procuring alms. And, O bull of the Bharata race, in course of his eleemosynary round among the houses of persons of good lineage, the Brahmana entered one such house that he knew from before. And as he entered the house, he said, Give. And he was answered by a female with the word, Stay. And while the housewife was engaged, O king, in cleaning the vessel from which alms are given, her husband, O thou best of the Bharatas, suddenly entered the house, very much afflicted with hunger. The chaste housewife beheld her husband, and disregarding the Brahmana, gave her lord water to wash his feet and face, and also a seat, and after that the black-eyed lady, placing before her lord savory food and drink, humbly stood beside him desirous of attending to all his wants. And, O Yudhishthira, that obedient wife used every day to eat the orts of her husband's plate, and, always conducting herself in obedience to the wishes of the Lord, that lady ever regarded her husband, and all her heart's affections inclined towards her lord. Of various and holy behavior, and skillful in all domestic duties, and attentive to all her relatives, she always did what was agreeable and beneficial to her husband, and she also, with rapt senses, attended to the worship of the gods and the wants of guests and servants and her mother-in-law and father-in-law. And while the lady of handsome eyes was still engaged in waiting upon her lord, she beheld that Brahmana waiting for alms, and beholding him, she remembered that she had asked him to wait. And remembering all this, she felt abashed. And then that chaste woman possessed of great fame, took something for alms, and went out, O thou foremost of the Bharatas, for giving it unto that Brahmana. And when she came before him, the Brahmana said, O best of women, O blessed one, I am surprised at thy conduct. Having requested me to wait, saying, Stay, thou didst not dismiss me. Markandeya continued, O Lord of men, beholding that Brahmana filled with wrath and blazing with his energy, that chaste woman began to conciliate him and said, O learned one, it behoveth thee to forgive me. My husband is my supreme God. He came hungry and tired and was being served and waited upon by me. Hearing this, the Brahmana said, With thee Brahmanas are not worthy of superior regard. Exaltest thou thy husband above them? Leading a domestic life, dost thou disregard Brahmanas? Indra himself boweth down unto them. What shall I say of men on earth? Proud woman, dost thou not know it, hast thou never heard it, that the Brahmanas are like fire and may consume the entire earth? At these words of that Brahmana the woman answered, I am no she-crane, O regenerate Rishi. O thou that art endued with the wealth of asceticism, cast off this anger of thine. Engaged as thou art, what canst thou do to me with these angry glances of thine? I do not disregard Brahmanas. Endued with great energy of soul, they are like unto the gods themselves. But, O sinless one, this fault of mine it behoveth thee to forgive. I know the energy and high dignity of Brahmanas that are possessed of wisdom. The waters of the ocean have been made brackish and undrinkable by the wrath of the Brahmanas. I know also the energy of meanness of souls under complete control and endued with blazing ascetic merit. The fire of their wrath to this day hath not been extinguished in the forest of Dandaka. It was for his having disregarded the Brahmanas that the great Asura, the wicked and evil-minded Vatapi, was digested when he came in contact with Agastya. It hath been heard by us that the powers and merits of high-souled Brahmanas are great. But, O Brahmana, as regenerate ones of high souls are great in wrath, so are they equally great in forgiveness. Therefore, O sinless one, it behoveth thee to forgive me in the matter of this my offense. O Brahmana, my heart inclineth to that merit which springeth from the service of my husband, for I regard my husband as the highest among all the gods. O best of Brahmanas, I practice that virtue which consists in serving my husband, whom I regard as the highest deity. Behold, O regenerate one, the merit that attaches to the service of one's husband. I know that thou hast burnt a she-crane with thy wrath. But, O best of regenerate ones, the anger that a person cherishes is the greatest of foes which that person hath. The gods know him for a Brahmana who hath cast off anger and passion. The gods know him for a Brahmana who always speaketh the truth here, who always gratifieth his preceptor, and who, though injured himself, never returneth the injury. The gods know him for a Brahmana who hath his senses under control, who is virtuous and pure and devoted to the study of the Vedas, and who hath mastery over anger and lust. The gods know him for a Brahmana who, cognizant of morals and endued with mental energy, is Catholic in religion and looketh upon all equal unto himself. The gods know him for a Brahmana who studieth himself and teacheth others, who performeth sacrifices himself and officiateth at the sacrifices of others, and who giveth away to the best of his means. The gods know that bull among the regenerate ones for a Brahmana who, endued with liberality of soul, practiseth the Brahmacharya vow and is devoted to study, in fact who is vigilantly devoted to the study of the Vedas. Whatever conduceth to the happiness of the Brahmanas is always recited before these. Ever taking pleasure in truth, the hearts of such men never find joy in untruth. O thou best of regenerate ones, it hath been said that the study of the Vedas, tranquility of soul, simplicity of behavior, and repression of the senses constitute the eternal duties of the Brahmana. Those cognizant with virtue and morals have said that truth and honesty are the highest virtue. Virtue that is eternal is difficult of being understood. But whatever it is based on truth. The ancients have declared that virtue dependeth on Shruti. But, O foremost of regenerate ones, virtue as exposed in Shruti appears to be of various kinds. It is, therefore, too subtle of comprehension. Thou, O Holy One, art cognizant of virtue, pure, and devoted to the study of the Vedas. I think, however, O Holy One, that thou dost not know what virtue in reality is. repairing to the city of Mithila, inquire thou of a virtuous fowler there, if indeed, O regenerate one, thou art not really acquainted with what constitutes the highest virtue. There liveth in Mithila a fowler who is truthful and devoted to the service of his parents, and who hath senses under complete control. Even he will discourse to thee on virtue. Blessed be thou, O best of regenerate ones, if thou likest, repair thither. O faultless one, it behoveth thee to forgive me, if what I have said be unpalatable, for they that are desirous of acquiring virtue are incapable of injuring women. At these words of the chaste woman, the Brahmana replied, saying, I am gratified with thee. Blessed be thou, my anger hath subsided, O beautiful one. The reproofs uttered by thee will be of the highest advantage to me. Blessed be thou, I shall now go and accomplish what is so conducive, O handsome one, to my benefit. Markandeya continued, dismissed by her, Kausika, that best of regenerate ones, left her house, and, reproaching himself, returned to his own abode. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 206. Markandeya said, continually reflecting upon that wonderful discourse of the woman, Kausika began to reproach himself and looked very much like a guilty person, and meditating on the subtle ways of morality and virtue, he said to himself, I should accept with reverence what the lady hath said, and should, therefore, repair to Mithila. Without doubt there dwelleth in that city a fowler of soul under complete control and fully acquainted with the mysteries of virtue and morality. This very day will I repair unto that one endued with wealth of asceticism for inquiring of him about virtue. His faith in her was assured by her knowledge of the death of the she-crane and the excellent words of virtuous import she had uttered. Kausika, thus reflecting with reverence upon all she had said, set out for Mithila, filled with curiosity. And he traversed many forests and villages and towns, and at last reached Mithila that was ruled over by Janaka, and he beheld the city to be adorned with the flags of various creeds. And he beheld that beautiful town to be resounding with the noise of sacrifices and festivities, and furnished with splendid gateways. It abounded with palatial residences, and protected by walls on all sides. It had many splendid buildings to boast of. And that delightful town was also filled with innumerable cars. And its streets and roads were many and well laid, and many of them were lined with shops. And it was full of horses and cars and elephants and warriors. And the citizens were all in health and joy, and they were always engaged in festivities. And having entered that city, that Brahmana beheld there many other things. And there the Brahmana inquired about the virtuous fowler, and was answered by some twice-born persons. And repairing to the place indicated by those regenerate ones, the Brahmana beheld the fowler seated in a butcher's yard, and the ascetic fowler was then selling venison and buffalo meat, and in consequence of the large concourse of buyers gathered round that fowler, Kausika stood at a distance. But the fowler, apprehending that the Brahmana had come to him, suddenly rose from his seat and went to that secluded spot where the Brahmana was staying, and having approached him there, the fowler said, I salute thee, O holy one. Welcome art thou, O thou best of Brahmanas. I am the fowler. Blessed be thou. Command me as to what I may do for thee. The word that the chaste woman said unto thee, viz., repair thou to Mithila, are known to me. I also know for what purpose thou hast come hither. Hearing these words of the fowler, that Brahmana was filled with surprise. And he began to reflect inwardly, saying, This indeed is the second marvel that I see. The fowler then said unto the Brahmana, saying, Thou art now standing in place that is scarcely proper for thee, O sinless one. If it pleases thee, let us go to my abode, O holy one. Markandeya continued, So be it, said the Brahmana unto him, gladly. And thereupon, the fowler proceeded towards his home with the Brahmana walking before him. And entering his abode that looked delightful, the fowler reverenced his guest by offering him a seat. And he also gave him water to wash his feet and face. And accepting these, that best of Brahmanas sat at his ease, and he then addressed the fowler, saying, It seems to me that this profession doth not befit thee. O fowler, I deeply regret that thou shouldst follow such a cruel trade. At these words of the Brahmana, the fowler said, This profession is that of my family, myself having inherited it from my sires and grandsires. O regenerate one, grieve not for me owing to my adhering to the duties that belong to me by birth. Discharging the duties ordained for me beforehand by the Creator, I carefully serve my superiors and the old. O thou best of Brahmanas! I always speak the truth, never envy others, and give to the best of my power. I live upon what remaineth after serving the gods, guests, and those that depend on me. I never speak ill of anything, small or great. O thou best of Brahmanas, the actions of a former life always follow the doer. In this world there are three principal professions, viz., agriculture, rearing of cattle, and trade. As regards the other world, the three Vedas, knowledge, and the science of morals are efficacious. Service, of the other three orders, hath been ordained to be the duty of the Sudra. Agriculture hath been ordained for the Vaishyas, and fighting for the Kshatriyas, while the practice of the Brahmacharya vow, asceticism, recitation of mantras, and truthfulness have been ordained for the Brahmanas. Over subjects adhering to their proper duties, the king should rule virtuously, while he should set those thereto that have fallen away from the duties of their order. Kings should ever be feared, because they are the lords of their subjects. They restrain those subjects of theirs that fall away from their duties as they restrain the motions of the deer by means of their shafts. O regenerate Rishi, there existeth not in the kingdom of Janaka a single subject that followeth not the duties of his birth. O thou best of the Brahmanas, all the four orders here rigidly adhere to their respective duties. King Janaka punisheth him that is wicked, even if he be his own son, but never doth he inflict pain on him that is virtuous. With good and able spies employed under him, he looketh upon all with impartial eyes. Prosperity, and kingdom, and capacity to punish, belong, O thou best of Brahmanas, to the Kshatriyas. Kings desire high prosperity through practice of the duties that belong to them. The king is the protector of all the four orders. As regards myself, O Brahmana, I always sell pork and buffalo meat without slaying those animals myself. I sell meat of animals, O regenerate Rishi, that have been slain by others. I never eat meat myself, never go to my wife except in her season. I always fast during the day, and eat, O regenerate one, in the night. Even though the behavior of his order is bad, a person may yet be himself of good behavior. So also a person may become virtuous, although he may be slayer of animals by profession. It is in consequence of the sinful acts of kings that virtue decreaseth greatly, and sin beginneth to prosper. And when all this taketh place, the subjects of the kingdom begin to decay. And it is then, O Brahmana, that ill-looking monsters, and dwarfs, and hunchbacked and large-headed wights, and men that are blind or deaf, or those that have paralyzed eyes, or are destitute of the power of procreation, begin to take their birth. It is from the sinfulness of kings that their subjects suffer numerous mischiefs. But this our king Janaka casteth his eyes upon all his subjects virtuously, and he is always kind unto them who, on their part, ever adhere to their respective duties. Regarding myself, I always with good deeds please those that speak well, as also those that speak ill of me. Those kings that live in the observance of their own proper duties, who are always engaged in the practice of acts that are good and honest, who are of souls under complete control, and who are endued with readiness and alacrity, may not depend upon anything else for supporting their power. Gift of food to the best of one's power, endurance of heat and cold, firmness in virtue, and a regard and tenderness for all creatures, these attributes can never find place in a person without an innate desire being present in him of separating himself from the world. One should avoid falsehood in speech, and should do good without solicitation. One should never cast off virtue from lust, from wrath, or from malice. One should never joy immoderately at a good turn or grieve immoderately at a bad one. One should never feel depressed when overtaken by poverty, nor when so overtaken abandon the path of virtue. If at any time one doth what is wrong, he should never do its like again. One should always urge his soul to the doing of that which he regardeth as beneficial. One should never return wrong for wrong, but should act honestly by those that have wronged him. That wretched man who desireth to do what is sinful slayeth himself. By doing what is sinful, one only imitates them that are wicked and sinful, disbelieving in virtue they that mock the good and the pure, saying, there is no virtue, undoubtedly meet with destruction. A sinful man swelleth up like a leather bag puffed up with wind. The thoughts of these wretches filled with pride and folly are feeble and unprofitable. It is the heart, the inner soul, that discovereth the fool like the sun that discovereth forms during the day. The food cannot always shine in the world by means of self-praise. The learned man, however, even if he be destitute of beauty, displayeth his luster by refraining from speaking ill of others and well of himself. No example, however, can be met with, in this world, of a person shining brilliantly on account of attributes to be found in him in their reputed measure. If one repenteth of a wrong done by him, that repentance washeth off his sin. The resolution of never doing it again saveth him from future sin, even as, O thou best of Brahmanas, he may save himself from sin by any of those expiations obtained in the Scriptures. Even this, O regenerate one, is the Shruti that may be seen in respect of virtue. He that having before been virtuous, committeth a sin, or committeth it unknowingly may destroy that sin. For virtue, O Brahmana, driveth off the sin that men commit from ignorance. A man, after having committed a sin, should cease to regard himself any longer as a man. No man can conceal his sins. The gods behold what one does, also the being that is within every one. He that with piety and without detraction hideth the faults of the honest and the wise like holes in his own attire, surely seeketh his salvation. If a man seeketh redemption after having committed a sin, without doubt he is purged of all his sins and looketh pure and resplendent like the moon emerged from the clouds. A man that seeketh redemption is washed of all his sins, even as the sun, upon rising, dispelleth all darkness. O best of Brahmanas, it is temptation that constitutes the basis of sin. Men that are ignorant commit sin, yielding to temptation alone. Sinful men generally cover themselves with a virtuous exterior, like wells whose mouths are covered by long grass. Outwardly they seem to possess self-control and holiness and indulge in preaching virtuous texts which, in their mouth, are of little meaning. Indeed, everything may be noticed in them except conduct that is truly virtuous. Markandeya continued, at these words, O best of men, of the fowler, that Brahmana endued with great wisdom, then asked the fowler, saying, How shall I know what is virtuous conduct? Blessed be thou, I desire to hear this, O thou foremost of virtuous men, from thee. Therefore, O thou of exalted soul, tell me all about it truly. Hearing these words, the fowler replied, saying, O best of Brahmanas, sacrifices, gift, asceticism, the Vedas, and truth, these 5 holy things are ever present in conduct that is called virtuous. Having subjugated lust and wrath, pride, avarice, and crookedness, they that take pleasure in virtue because it is virtue, are regarded as really virtuous and worthy of the approbation of persons that are virtuous. These persons who are devoted to sacrifices and study of the Vedas have no independent behavior. They follow only the practices of the honest and the good. This, indeed, is the second attribute of the virtuous. Waiting upon superiors, truth, freedom from anger, and gift, these 4, O Brahmana, are inseparably connected with behavior that is virtuous. For the reputation that a person acquires by setting his heart on virtuous behavior and adhering to it rigidly is incapable of acquisition except by practicing the 4 virtues named above. The essence of the Vedas is truth, the essence of truth is self-control, and the essence of self-control is abstention from the pleasures of the world. These all are to be noticed in behavior that is virtuous. They that follow those deluded fools that mock the forms of faith prevailing among men are dragged into destruction for walking in such a sinful path. They, however, that are virtuous and engaged in the observance of vows, who are devoted to the Shrutis and the virtue of abstention from the pleasure of the world, they in fact who tread in virtue's path and follow the true religion, they that are obedient to the mandates of their preceptors, and who reflect upon the sense of the Scriptures with patience and carefulness, is these that are said to be possessed of behavior that is virtuous. It is these, O Brahmana, that are said to properly guide their higher intelligence. Forsaking those that are atheists, those that transgress virtue's limits, those that are of wicked souls, those that live in sinfulness, betake thyself to knowledge, reverencing those that are virtuous. Lust and temptation are even like sharks in the river of life, the waters are the 5 senses. Do thou cross over to the other side of this river in the boat of patience and resignation, avoiding the shoals of corporeal existence, repeated births in this world. The supreme virtue consisting in the exercise of the intelligent principle and abstraction, when gradually superadded to virtuous conduct, becomes beautiful like dye on white fabrics. Truthfulness and abstention from doing injuries to any one are virtues highly beneficial to all creatures. Of these, that latter is a cardinal virtue, and is based on truth. Our mental faculties have their proper play when their foundation is laid in truth, and in the exercise of virtue truth is of the highest value. Purity of conduct is the characteristic of all good men. Those that are distinguished for holy living are good and virtuous. All creatures follow the principles of conduct which are innate in their nature. The sinful being who has no control over self acquires lust, anger, and other vices. It is the immemorial rule that virtuous actions are those that are founded on justice, and it is also ordained by holy men that all iniquitous conduct is sin. Those who are not swayed by anger, pride, haughtiness, and envy, and those who are quiet and straightforward, are men of virtuous conduct. Those who are diligent in performing the rites enjoined in the three Vedas, who are wise, and of pure and virtuous conduct, who exercise self-restraint and are full of attention to their superior, are men of virtuous conduct. The actions and conduct of such men of great power are very difficult of attainment. They are sanctified by the purification of their own actions, and consequently sin in them dies out of itself. This virtue of good conduct is wonderful, ancient, immutable, and eternal, and wise men observing this virtue with holiness attain to heaven. These men who believe in the existence of the deity, who are free from false pride, and versed in holy writ, and who respect regenerate, twice-born men, go to heaven. Among holy men, virtue is differentiated in three ways: that great virtue which is inculcated in the Vedas, the other which is inculcated in the Dharma Shastras, the minor scriptures, and virtuous conduct. And virtuous conduct is indicated by acquisition of knowledge, pilgrimage to sacred places, truthfulness, forbearance, purity, and straightforwardness. Virtuous men are always kind to all creatures, and well disposed towards regenerate men. They abstain from doing injuries to any creature, and are never rude in speech. Those good men who know well the consequences of the fruition of their good and evil deeds are commended by virtuous men. Those who are just and good-natured, and endowed with virtue, who wish well of all creatures, who are steadfast in the path of virtue, and have conquered heaven, who are charitable, unselfish, and of unblemished character, who succor the afflicted, and are learned and respected by all, who practice austerities, and are kind to all creatures, are commended as such by the virtuous. Those who are charitably disposed attain prosperity in this world, as also the regions of bliss hereafter. The virtuous man, when solicited for assistance by good men, bestow alms on them by straining to the utmost, even to the deprivation of the comforts of his wife and servants. Good men, having an eye to their own welfare, as also virtue and the ways of the world, act in this way and thereby grow in virtue through endless ages. Good persons possessing the virtues of truthfulness, abstention from doing injury to any one, rectitude, abstention from evil towards any one, want of haughtiness, modesty, resignation, self-restraint, absence of passion, wisdom, patience, and kindness towards all creatures, and freedom from malice and lust, are the witnesses of the world. These three are said to constitute the perfect way of the virtuous, viz., a man must not do wrong to anybody, he must bestow alms, and must always be truthful. Those high-souled good men of virtuous conduct and settled convictions, who are kind to all and are full of compassion, depart with contentment from this world to the perfect way of virtue. Freedom from malice, forbearance, peace of mind, contentment, pleasant speech, renunciation of desire and anger, virtuous conduct and actions regulated according to the ordinances of Holy Writ, constitute the perfect way of the virtuous. And those who are constant in virtue follow these rules of virtuous conduct, and having reached the pinnacle of knowledge, and discriminating between the various phases of human conduct, which are either very virtuous or the reverse, they escape from the great danger. Thus, O great Brahmana, having introduced the subject of virtuous conduct, have I described to thee all this, according to my own knowledge and to what I have heard on the subject. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 207. Markandeya continued, "The pious fowler, O Yudhishthira, then said to that Brahmana, 'Undoubtedly my deeds are very cruel, but, O Brahmana, destiny is all-powerful and it is difficult to evade the consequence of our past actions. And this is the karmic evil arising out of sin committed in a former life. But, O Brahmana, I am always assiduous in eradicating the evil. The deity takes away life, the executioner acts only as a secondary agent. And we, O good Brahmana, are only such agents in regard to our karma. Those animals that are slain by me and whose meat I sell also acquire karma, because, with their meat, gods and guests and servants are regaled with dainty food and the manes are propitiated. It is said authoritatively that herbs and vegetables, deer, birds, and wild animals constitute the food of all creatures. And, O Brahmana, King Sivi, the son of Usanara, of great forbearance attained to heaven, which is hard to reach, giving away his own flesh. And in days of yore, O Brahmana, 2,000 animals used to be killed every day in the kitchen of King Rantadeva, and in the same manner 2,000 cows were killed every day. And, O best of regenerate beings, King Rantadeva acquired unrivaled reputation by distributing food with meat every day. For the performance of the 4 monthly rites, animals ought to be sacrificed daily. The sacred fire is fond of animal food, this saying has come down to us. And at sacrifices animals are invariably killed by regenerate brahmanas, and these animals being purged of sin, by incantation of hymns, go to heaven. If, O Brahmana, the sacred fire had not been so fond of animal food in ancient times, it could never have become the food of anyone. And in this matter of animal food, this rule has been laid down by Munis: whoever partakes of animal food after having first offered it duly and respectfully to the gods and the manes is not polluted by the act. And such a man is not at all considered to have partaken of animal food, even as a Brahmacharan having intercourse with his wife during the menstrual period is nevertheless considered to be a good Brahmana. After consideration of the propriety and impropriety of the matter, this rule has been laid down. King Sadesa, O Brahmana, when under a curse, often used to prey upon men. What is thy opinion of this matter? And, O good Brahmana, knowing this to be the consequence of my own actions, I obtain my livelihood from this profession. The forsaking of one's own occupation is considered, O Brahmana, to be a sin, and the act of sticking to one's own profession is without doubt a meritorious act. The karma of a former existence never forsakes any creature. And in determining the various consequences of one's karma, this rule was not lost sight of by the Creator. A person having his being under the influence of evil karma must always consider how he can atone for his karma and extricate himself from an evil doom, and the evil karma may be expiated in various ways. Accordingly, O good Brahmana, I am charitable, truthful, assiduous in attending on my superior, full of respect towards regenerate brahmanas, devoted to and free from pride and idle, excessive talk. Agriculture is considered to be a praiseworthy occupation, but it is well known that even there, great harm is done to animal life, and in the operation of digging the earth with the plow, numberless creatures lurking in the ground as also various other forms of animal life are destroyed. Dost thou not think so? O good Brahmana, vrihi and other seeds of rice are all living organisms. What is thy opinion on this matter? Men, O Brahmana, hunt wild animals and kill them and partake of their meat. They also cut up trees and herbs. But, O Brahmana, there are numberless living organisms in trees and fruits, as also in water. Dost thou not think so? This whole creation, O Brahmana, is full of animal life, sustaining itself with food derived from living organisms. Dost thou not mark that fish preys upon fish, and that various species of animals prey upon other species, and there are species the members of which prey upon each other? Men, O Brahmana, while walking about hither and thither, kill numberless creatures lurking in the ground by trampling on them, and even men of wisdom and enlightenment destroy animal life in various ways, even while sleeping or reposing themselves. What hast thou to say to this? The earth and the air all swarm with living organisms, which are unconsciously destroyed by men from mere ignorance. Is not this so? The commandment that people should not do harm to any creature was ordained of old by men who were ignorant of the true facts of the case. For, O Brahmana, there is not a man on the face of this earth who is free from the sin of doing injury to creatures. After full consideration, the conclusion is irresistible that there is not a single man who is free from the sin of doing injury to animal life. Even the sage, O good Brahmana, whose vow is to do harm to no creature, doth inflict injury to animal life. Only, on account of greater needfulness, the harm is less. Men of noble birth and great qualities perpetrate wicked acts in defiance of all, of which they are not at all ashamed. Good men acting in an exemplary way are not commended by other good men, nor are bad men acting in a contrary way praised by their wicked compeers, and friends are not agreeable to friends, albeit endowed with high qualities, and foolish pedantic men cry down the virtues of their preceptors. This reversal of the natural order of things, O good Brahmana, is seen everywhere in this world. What is thy opinion as to the virtuousness or otherwise of this state of things? There is much that can be said of the goodness or badness of our actions. But whoever is addicted to his own proper occupation surely acquires great reputation. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 208. Markandeya continued, O Yudhishthira, the virtuous fowler, eminent in pity, then skillfully addressed himself again to that foremost of Brahmanas, saying, It is the dictum of the aged that the ways of righteousness are subtle, diverse, and infinite. When life is at stake and in the matter of marriage, it is proper to tell an untruth. Untruth sometimes leads to the triumph of truth, and the latter dwindles into untruth. Whichever conduces most to the good of all creatures is considered to be truth. Virtue is thus perverted, mark thou its subtle ways. O best of virtuous men, man's actions are either good or bad, and he undoubtedly reaps their fruits. The ignorant man, having attained to an abject state, grossly abuses the gods, not knowing that it is the consequence of his own evil karma. The foolish, the designing, and the fickle, O good Brahmana, always attain the very reverse of happiness or misery. Neither learning nor good morals, nor personal exertion can save them. And if the fruits of our exertion were not dependent on anything else, people would attain the object of their desire by simply striving to attain it. It is seen that able, intelligent, and diligent persons are baffled in their efforts and do not attain the fruits of their actions. On the other hand, persons who are always active in injuring others and in practicing deception on the world lead a happy life. There are some who attain prosperity without any exertion. And there are others who, with the utmost exertion, are unable to achieve their dues. Miserly persons, with the object of having sons born to them, worship the gods and practice severe austerities, and those sons, having remained in the womb for 10 months, at length turn out to be very infamous issue of their race, and others begotten under the same auspices decently pass their lives in luxury with heaps of riches and grain accumulated by their ancestors. The diseases from which man suffer are undoubtedly the result of their own karma. They then behave like small deer at the hands of hunters, and they are racked with mental troubles. And, O Brahmana, as hunters intercept the flight of their game, the progress of those diseases is checked by able and skillful physicians with their collections of drugs. And, the best of the cherishers of religion, thou hast observed that those who have it in their power to enjoy the good things of this earth are prevented from doing so from the fact of their suffering from chronic bowel complaints, and that many others that are strong and powerful suffer from misery, and are enabled with great difficulty to obtain a livelihood, and that every man is thus helpless, overcome by misery and illusion, and again tossed and overpowered by the powerful current of his own actions, karma. If there were absolute freedom of action, no creature would die, none would be subject to decay, or await his evil doom, and everybody would attain the object of his desire. All persons desire to outdistance their neighbors in the race of life, and they strive to do so to the utmost of their power, but the result turns out otherwise. Many are the persons born under the influence of the same star and the same auspices of good luck, but a great diversity is observable in the maturity of their actions. No person, O good Brahmana, can be the dispenser of his own lot. The actions done in a previous existence are seen to fructify in our present life. It is the immemorial tradition that the soul is eternal and everlasting, but the corporeal frame of all creatures is subject to destruction here, below. When therefore life is extinguished, the body only is destroyed, but the spirit, wedded to its actions, travels elsewhere. The Brahmana replied, O best of those versed in the doctrine of karma, and in the delivery of discourses, I long to know accurately how the soul becomes eternal. The fowler replied, The spirit dies not, there being simply a change of tenement. They are mistaken, who foolishly say that all creatures die. The soul betakes itself to another frame, and its change of habitation is called its death. In the world of men, no man reaps the consequences of another man's karma. Whatever one does, he is sure to reap the consequences thereof, for the consequences of the karma that is once done can never be obviated. The virtuous become endowed with great virtues, and sinful men become the perpetrators of wicked deeds. Men's actions follow them, and influenced by these, they are born again. The Brahmana inquired, Why does the spirit take its birth, and why does its nativity become sinful or virtuous, and how, O good man, does it come to belong to a sinful or virtuous race? The fowler replied, This mystery seems to belong to the subject of procreation, but I shall briefly describe to you, O good Brahmana, how the spirit is born again with its accumulated load of karma, the righteous in a virtuous, and the wicked in a sinful nativity. By the performance of virtuous actions it attains to the state of the gods, and by a combination of good and evil, it acquires the human state. By indulgence in sensuality and similar demoralizing practices it is born in the lower species of animals, and by sinful acts, it goes to the infernal regions. Afflicted with the miseries of birth and dotage, man is fated to rot here below from the evil consequences of his own actions. Passing through thousands of births, as also the infernal regions, our spirits wander about, secured by the fetters of their own karma. Animate beings become miserable in the next world on account of these actions done by themselves, and from the reaction of those miseries, they assume lower births, and then they accumulate a new series of actions, and they consequently suffer misery over again, like sickly men partaking of unwholesome food, and although they are thus afflicted, they consider themselves to be happy and at ease, and consequently their fetters are not loosened, and new karma arises, and suffering from diverse miseries they turn about in this world like a wheel. If casting off their fetters they purify themselves by their actions and practice austerities and religious meditations, then, O best of Brahmanas, they attain the Elysian regions by these numerous acts, and by casting off their fetters, and by the purification of karma, men attain those blissful regions where misery is unknown to those who go there. The sinful man who is addicted to vices never comes to the end of his course of iniquities. Therefore must we strive to do what is virtuous and forbear from doing what is unrighteous. Whoever with a heart full of gratefulness and free from malice strives to do what is good, attains wealth, virtue, happiness and heaven hereafter. Those who are purified of sins, wise, forbearing, constant in righteousness, and self-restrained enjoy continuous felicity in this as well as in the next world. Man must follow the standard of virtue of the good, and in his acts imitate the example of the righteous. There are virtuous men, versed in holy writ and learned in all departments of knowledge. Man's proper duty consists in following his own proper avocation, and this being the case these latter do not become confused and mixed up. The wise man delights in virtue and lives by righteousness. And, O good Brahmana, such a man with the wealth of righteousness which he hereby acquires, waters the root of the plant in which he finds most virtue. The virtuous man acts thus, and his mind is calmed. He is pleased with his friends in this world, and he also attains happiness hereafter. Virtuous people, O good man, acquire dominion over all and the pleasure of beauty, flavor, sound and touch according to their desire. These are known to be the rewards of virtue. But the man of enlightened vision, O great Brahmana, is not satisfied with reaping the fruits of righteousness. Not content with that, he with the light of spiritual wisdom that is in him, becomes indifferent to pain and pleasure, and the vice of the world influenceth him not. Of his own free will he becometh indifferent to worldly pursuits, but he forsaketh not virtue. Observing that everything worldly is evanescent, he trieth to renounce everything, and counting on more chance he deviseth means for the attainment of salvation. Thus doth he renounce the pursuits of the world, shunneth the ways of sin, becometh virtuous, and at last attaineth salvation. Spiritual wisdom is the prime requisite of men, for salvation, resignation, and forbearance are its roots. By this means he attaineth all the objects of this desire. But subduing the senses, and by means of truthfulness and forbearance, he attaineth, O good Brahmana, the supreme asylum of Brahma. The Brahmana again inquired, O thou most eminent in virtue and constant in the performance of the religious obligations, you talk of senses, what are they, how may they be subdued, and what is the good of subduing them, and how doth a creature reap the fruits thereof? O pious man, I beg to acquaint myself with the truth of this matter. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 209. Markandeya continued, Hear, O King Yudhishthira, what the virtuous fowler, thus interrogated by that Brahmana, said to him in reply. The fowler said, Men's minds are at first bent on the acquisition of knowledge. That acquired, O good Brahmana, they indulge in their passions and desires, and for that end they labor and set about tasks of great magnitude and indulge in much desired pleasures of beauty, flavor, and see. Then follows fondness, then envy, then avarice, and then extinction of all spiritual light. And when men are thus influenced by avarice and overcome by envy and fondness, their intellect ceases to be guided by righteousness, and they practice the very mockery of virtue. Practicing virtue with hypocrisy, they are content to acquire wealth by dishonorable means. With the wealth thus acquired, the intelligent principle in them becomes enamored of those evil ways, and they are filled with a desire to commit sins. And when, O good Brahmana, their friends and men of wisdom remonstrate with them, they are ready with specious answers, which are neither sound nor convincing. From their being addicted to evil ways, they are guilty of a threefold sin. They commit sin in thought, in word, as also in action. They being addicted to wicked ways, all their good qualities die out, and these men of wicked deeds cultivate the friendship of men of similar character, and consequently they suffer misery in this world as well as in the next. The sinful man is of this nature, and now hear of the man of virtue. He discerns these evils by means of his spiritual insight, and is able to discriminate between happiness and misery, and is full of respectful attention to men of virtue, and from practicing virtues, his mind becomes inclined to righteousness. The Brahmana replied, Thou hast given a true exposition of religion which none else is able to expound. Thy spiritual power is great, and thou dost appear to me to be like a great rishi. The fowler replied, The great Brahmanas are worshipped with the same honors as our ancestors, and they are always propitiated with offerings of food before others. Wise men in this world do what is pleasing to them, with all their heart. And I shall, O good Brahmana, describe to thee what is pleasing to them, after having bowed down to Brahmanas as a class. Do thou learn from me the Brahmanic philosophy. This whole universe, unconquerable everywhere and abounding in great elements, is Brahma, and there is nothing higher than this. The earth, air, water, fire, and sky are the great elements. And form, odor, sound, touch, and taste are their characteristic properties. These latter two have their properties which are also correlated to each other. And of the three qualities, which are gradually characterized by each, in order of priority is consciousness, which is called the mind. The seventh is intelligence, and after that comes egoism, and then the five senses, then the soul, then the moral qualities called sattva, rajas, and tamas. These 17 are said to be the unknown or incomprehensible qualities. I have described all this to thee, what else dost thou wish to know? Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 210. Markandeya continued, O Bharata, the Brahmana, thus interrogated by the virtuous fowler, resumed again this discourse so pleasing to the mind. The Brahmana said, O best of the cherishers of religion, it is said that there are 5 great elements. Do thou describe to me in full the properties of any one of the 5. The fowler replied, The earth, water, fire, air, and sky all have properties interlapping each other. I shall describe them to thee. The earth, O Brahmana, has 5 qualities, water 4, fire 3, and the air and sky together 3 also. Sound, touch, form, odor, and taste, these 5 qualities belong to earth, and sound, touch, form, and taste, O austere Brahmana, have been described to thee as the properties of water, and sound, touch, and form are the three properties of fire, and air has two properties, sound and touch, and sound is the property of sky. And, O Brahmana, these 15 properties inherent in 5 elements exist in all substances of which this universe is composed. And they are not opposed to one another, they exist, O Brahmana, in proper combination. When this whole universe is thrown into a state of confusion, then every corporeal being in the fullness of time assumes another corpus. It arises and perishes in due order. And there are present the 5 elementary substances of which all the mobile and immobile world is composed. Whatever is perceptible by the senses is called vyakta, knowable or comprehensible, and whatever is beyond the reach of the senses and can only be perceived by guesses is known to be avyakta, not vyakta. When a Puran engages in the discipline of self-examination, after having subdued the senses which have of their own proper objective play in the external conditions of sound, form, and see, then he beholds his own spirit pervading the universe, and the universe reflected in itself. He who is wedded to his previous karma, although skilled in the highest spiritual wisdom, is cognizant only of his soul's objective existence, but the person whose soul is never affected by the objective conditions around is never subject to ills, owing to its absorption in the elementary spirit of Brahma. When a person has overcome the domination of illusion, his manly virtues, consisting of the essence of spiritual wisdom, turn to the spiritual enlightenment which illumines the intelligence of sentient beings. Such a person is styled by the omnipotent, intelligent spirit as one who is without beginning and without end, self-existent, immutable, incorporeal, and incomparable. This, O Brahmana, that thou hast inquired of me is only the result of self-discipline. And this self-discipline can only be acquired by subduing the senses. It cannot be otherwise. Heaven and hell are both dependent on our senses. When subdued, they lead to heaven. When indulged in, they lead to perdition. This subjugation of the senses is the highest means of attaining spiritual light. Our senses are at the root of our spiritual advancement as also at the root of our spiritual degradation. By indulging in them, a person undoubtedly contracts vices, and by subduing these, he attains salvation. The self-restrained person who acquires mastery over the 6 senses inherent in our nature is never tainted with sin, and consequently evil has no power over him. Man's corporeal self has been compared to a chariot, his soul to a charioteer, and his senses to horses. A dexterous man drives about without confusion, like a quiet charioteer with well-broken horses. That man is an excellent driver who knows how to patiently wield the reins of those wild horses, the 6 senses inherent in our nature. When our senses become ungovernable like horses on the high road, we must patiently rein them in, for with patience, we are sure to get the better of them. When a man's mind is overpowered by any one of these senses running wild, he loses his reason and becomes like a ship tossed by storms upon the high ocean. Men are deceived by illusion in hoping to reap the fruits of those 6 things, whose effects are studied by persons of spiritual insight, who thereby reap the fruits of their clear perception. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 211. Markandeya continued, O Bharata, the fowler having expounded these abstruse points, the Brahmana with great attention again inquired of him about these subtle topics. The Brahmana said, Do thou truly describe to me, who now duly asked thee, the respective virtues of the qualities of sattva, rajas, and tamas. The fowler replied, Very well, I shall tell thee what thou hast asked. I shall describe separately their respective virtues, do thou listen. Of them tamas is characterized by illusion, spiritual, rajas incites men to action, sattva is of great grandeur, and on that account, it is said to be the greatest of them. He who is greatly under the influence of spiritual ignorance, who is foolish, senseless, and given to dreaming, who is idle, unenergetic, and swayed by anger and haughtiness, is said to be under the influence of tamas. And, O Brahmana Rishi, that excellent man who is agreeable in speech, thoughtful, free from envy, industrious in action from an eager desire to reap its fruits, and of warm temperament, is said to be under the influence of rajas. And he who is resolute, patient, not subject to anger, free from malice, and is not skillful in action from one of a selfish desire to reap its fruits, wise and forbearing, is said to be under the influence of sattva. When a man endowed with the sattva quality is influenced by worldliness, he suffers misery, but he hates worldliness when he realizes its full significance. And then a feeling of indifference to worldly affairs begins to influence him. And then his pride decreases, and uprightness becomes more prominent, and his conflicting moral sentiments are reconciled. And then self-restraint in any matter becomes unnecessary. A man, O Brahmana, may be born in the Sudra caste, but if he is possessed of good qualities, he may attain the state of Vaishya and similarly that of a Kshatriya, and if he is steadfast in rectitude, he may even become a Brahmana. I have described to thee these virtues. What else dost thou wish to learn? Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 212. The Brahmana inquired, how is it that fire, vital force, in combination with the earthly element, matter, becomes the corporeal tenement of living creatures, and how doth the vital air, the breath of life, according to the nature of its seat, the muscles and nerves, excite to action the corporeal frame? Markandeya said, this question, O Yudhishthira, having been put to the Brahmana by the fowler, the latter, in reply, said to that high-minded Brahmana. The fowler said the vital spirit manifesting itself in the seat of consciousness causes the action of the corporeal frame. And the soul being present in both of them acts through them. The past, the present, and the future are inseparably associated with the soul. And it is the highest of a creature's possessions, it is of the essence of the Supreme Spirit, and we adore it. It is the animating principle of all creatures, and it is the eternal Purusha, spirit. It is great, and it is the intelligence and the ego, and it is the subjective seat of the various properties of elements. Thus, while seated here, in a corporeal frame, it is sustained in all its relations external or internal, to matter or mind, by the subtle ethereal air called prana, and thereafter, each creature goes its own way by the action of another subtle air called samama. And this latter, transforming itself into apana air, and supported by the head of the stomach, carries the refuse matter of the body, urine and sea, to the kidneys and intestines. That same air is present in the three elements of effort, exertion, and power, and in that condition it is called udana air by persons learned in physical science, and when manifesting itself by its presence at all the junctional points of the human system, it is known by the name Vyana. And the internal heat is diffused over all the tissues of our system, and supported by these kinds of air, it transforms our food and the tissues and the humors of our system. And by the coalition of prana and other airs, a reaction, combination, ensues, and the heat generated thereby is known as the internal heat of the human system, which causes the digestion of our food. The prana and the apana air are interposed within the samama and the udana air. And the heat generated by their coalition causes the growth of the body, consisting of the 7 substances, bones, muscles, and sea. And that portion of its seat extending to as far as the rectum is called apana, and from that arteries arise in the 5 airs prana and sea. The prana air, acted on by the heat, strikes against the extremity of the apana region, and then recoiling, it reacts on the heat. Above the navel is the region of undigested food, and below it the region of digestion. And the prana and all other airs of the system are seated in the navel. The arteries issuing from the heart run upwards and downwards, as also in oblique directions. They carry the best essence of our food, and are acted upon by the 10 prana airs. This is the way by which patient yogins who have overcome all difficulties, and who view things with an impartial and equal eye, with their souls seated in the brain, find the Supreme Spirit. The prana and the apana airs are thus present in the body of all creatures. Know that the spirit is embodied in corporeal disguise, in the 11 allotropous conditions of the animal system, and that though eternal, its normal state is apparently modified by its accompaniments, even like the fire purified in its pan, eternal, yet with its course altered by its surroundings, and that the divine thing which is kindred with the body is related to the latter in the same way as a drop of water to the sleek surface of a lotus leaf on which it rolls. Know that sattva, rajas, and tamas are the attributes of all life, and that life is the attribute of spirit, and that the latter again is an attribute of the Supreme Spirit. Inert, and sensible matter is the seat of the living principle, which is active in itself and induces activity in others. That thing by which the seven worlds are incited to action is called the Most High by men of high spiritual insight. Thus in all these elements, the eternal spirit does not show itself, but is perceived by the learned in spiritual science by reason of their high and keen perception. A pure-minded person, by purification of his heart, is able to destroy the good and evil effect of his actions and attains eternal beatitude by the enlightenment of his inward spirit. That state of peace and purification of heart is likened to the state of a person who in a cheerful state of mind sleeps soundly, or the brilliance of a lamp trimmed by a skillful hand. Such a pure-minded person living on spare diet perceives the Supreme Spirit reflected in his own, and by practicing concentration of mind in the evening and small hours of the night, he beholds the Supreme Spirit, which has no attributes, in the light of his heart, shining like a dazzling lamp, and thus he attains salvation. Avarice and anger must be subdued by all means, for this act constitutes the most sacred virtue that people can practice and is considered to be the means by which men can cross over to the other side of this sea of affliction and trouble. A man must preserve his righteousness from being overcome by the evil consequences of anger, his virtues from the effects of pride, his learning from the effects of vanity, and his own spirit from illusion. Leniency is the best of virtues, and forbearance is the best of powers. The knowledge of our spiritual nature is the best of all knowledge, and truthfulness is the best of all religious obligations. The telling of truth is good, and the knowledge of truth may also be good, but what conduces to the greatest good of all creatures is known as the highest truth. He whose actions are performed not with the object of securing any reward or blessing, who has sacrificed all to the requirements of his renunciation, is a real sannyasin and is really wise. And as communion with Brahma cannot be taught to us, even by our spiritual preceptor, he only giving us a clue to the mystery renunciation of the material world is called yoga. We must not do harm to any creature and must live in terms of amity with all, and in this our present existence, we must not avenge ourselves on any creature. Self-abnegation, peace of mind, renunciation of hope, and equanimity, these are the ways by which spiritual enlightenment can always be secured, and the knowledge of self, one's own spiritual nature, is the best of all knowledge. In this world as well as hereafter, renouncing all worldly desires and assuming a stoic indifference, wherein all suffering is at rest, people should fulfill their religious duties with the aid of their intelligence. The muni who desires to obtain moksha, salvation, which is very difficult to attain, must be constant in austerities, forbearing, self-restrained, and must give up that longing fondness which binds him to the things of this earth. They call these the attributes of the Supreme Spirit. The gunas, qualities or attributes that we are conscious of, reduce themselves to agunas, non-gunas, in him. He is not bound by anything, and is perceptible only by the expansion and development of our spiritual vision. As soon as the illusion of ignorance is dispelled, this supreme unalloyed beatitude is attained. By foregoing the objects of both pleasure and pain, and by renouncing the feelings which bind him to the things of this earth, a man may attain Brahma, Supreme Spirit, or salvation. O good Brahmana, I have now briefly explained to thee all this, as I have heard. What else dost thou wish to know? Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 213. Markandeya said, when, O Yudhishthira, all this mystery of salvation was explained to that Brahmana, he was highly pleased, and he said, addressing the fowler, all this that thou hast explained is rational, and it seems to me that there is nothing in connection with the mysteries of religion which thou dost not know. The fowler replied, O good and great Brahmana, thou shalt perceive with thine own eyes all the virtue that I lay claim to, and by reason of which I have attained this blissful state. Rise, worshipful sir, and quickly enter this inner apartment. O virtuous man, it is proper that thou shouldst see my father and my mother. Markandeya continued, thus addressed the Brahmana went in, and beheld a fine beautiful mansion. It was a magnificent house divided in 4 suites of rooms, admired by gods and looking like one of their palaces. It was also furnished with seats and beds, and redolent of excellent perfumes. His revered parents, clad in white robes, having finished their meals, were seated at ease. The fowler, beholding them, prostrated himself before them with his head at their feet. His aged parents then addressed him thus: Rise, O man of piety, rise, may righteousness shield thee. We are much pleased with thee for thy piety. Mayst thou be blessed with a long life, and with knowledge, high intelligence, and fulfillment of thy desires. Thou art a good and dutiful son, for we are constantly and reasonably looked after by thee, and even amongst the celestials thou hast not another divinity to worship. By constantly subduing thyself, thou hast become endowed with the self-restraining power of Brahmanas, and all thy grandsires and ancestors are constantly pleased with thee for thy self-restraining virtues and for thy piety towards us. In thought, word, or deed thy attention to us never flags, and it seems that at present thou hast no other thought in thy mind, save as to how to please us. As Rama, the son of Jamadagni, labored to please his aged parents, so hast thou, O son, done to please us, and even more. Then the fowler introduced the Brahmana to his parents, and they received him with the usual salutation of welcome, and the Brahmana, accepting their welcome, inquired if they, with their children and servants, were all right at home, and if they were always enjoying good health at that time of life. The aged couple replied, At home, O Brahmana, we are all right, with all our servants. Hast thou, adorable sir, reached this place without any difficulty? Markandeya continued. The Brahmana replied, Yes, I have. Then the fowler, addressing himself to the Brahmana, said to him, These my parents, worshipful sir, are the idols that I worship. Whatever is due to the gods, I do unto them. As the 33 gods with Indra at their head are worshipped by men, so are these aged parents of mine worshipped by me. As Brahmanas exert themselves for the purpose of procuring offering for their gods, so do I act with diligence for these two idols of mine. These my father and mother, O Brahmana, are my supreme gods, and I seek to please them always with offering of flowers, fruits, and gems. To me they are like the 3 sacred fires mentioned by the learned, and, O Brahmana, they seem to me to be as good as sacrifices or the 4 Vedas. My 5 life-giving heirs, my wife and children and friends are all for them, dedicated to their service. And with my wife and children I always attend on them. O good Brahmana, with my own hands I assist them in bathing and also wash their feet and give them food, and I say to them only what is agreeable, leaving out what is unpleasant. I consider it to be my highest duty to do what is agreeable to them, even though it be not strictly justifiable. And, O Brahmana, I am always diligent in attending on them. The 2 parents, the sacred fire, the soul, and the spiritual preceptor, these 5, O good Brahmana, are worthy of the highest reverence from a person who seeks prosperity. By serving them properly, one acquires the merit of perpetually keeping up the sacred fire. And it is the eternal and invariable duty of all householders. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 214. Markandeya continued. The virtuous fowler, having introduced his, both, parents to that Brahmana as his highest gurus, again spoke to him as follows: Mark thou the power of this virtue of mine, by which my inner spiritual vision is extended. For this, thou wast told by that self-restrained, truthful lady, devoted to her husband, Hie thee to Mithila, for there lives a fowler who will explain to thee the mysteries of religion. The Brahmana said, O pious man, so constant in fulfilling thy religious obligations, bethinking myself of what that truthful good-natured lady so true to her husband hath said, I am convinced that thou art really endowed with every high quality. The fowler replied, I have no doubt, my lord, that what that lady, so faithful to her husband, said to thee about me, was said with full knowledge of the facts. I have, O Brahmana, explained to thee all this as a matter of favor. And now, good sir, listen to me. I shall explain what is good for thee. O good Brahmana, of irreproachable character, thou hast wronged thy father and thy mother, for thou hast left home without their permission, for the purpose of learning the Vedas. Thou hast not acted properly in this matter, for thy ascetic and aged parents have become entirely blind from grief at thy loss. Do thou return home to console them. May this virtue never forsake thee. Thou art high-minded, of ascetic merit, and always devoted to thy religion, but all these have become useless to thee. Do thou without delay return to console thy parents. Do have some regard for my words, and not act otherwise. I tell thee what is good for thee, O Brahmana Rishi, do thou return home this very day. The Brahmana replied, "This that thou hast said is undoubtedly true. Mayst thou, O pious man, attain prosperity. I am much pleased with thee." The fowler said, "O Brahmana, as thou practicest with assiduousness those divine, ancient, and eternal virtues which are so difficult of attainment even by pure-minded persons, thou appearest, to me, like a divine being. Return to the side of thy father and mother and be quick and diligent in honoring thy parents, for I do not know if there is any virtue higher than this." The Brahmana replied, "By a piece of singular good luck have I arrived here, and by a piece of similar good luck have I thus been associated with thee. It is very difficult to find out, in our midst, a person who can so well expound the mysteries of religion. There is scarcely one man among thousands who is well versed in the science of religion. I am very glad, O great man, to have secured thy friendship. Mayst thou be prosperous. I was on the point of falling into hell, but was extricated by thee. It was destined to be so, for thou didst, unexpectedly, come in my way. And, O great man, as the fallen King Yayati was saved by his virtuous grandsons, daughters' sons, so have I now been saved by thee. According to thy advice, I shall honor my father and my mother, for a man with an impure heart can never expound the mysteries of sin and righteousness. As it is very difficult for a person born in the Sudra class to learn the mysteries of the eternal religion, I do not consider thee to be a Sudra. There must surely be some mystery in connection with this matter. Thou must have attained the Sudra's estate by reason of the fruition of thine own past karma. O magnanimous man, I long to know the truth about this matter. Do thou tell it to me with attention and according to thy own inclination." The fowler replied, "O good Brahmana, Brahmanas are worthy of all respect from me. Listen, O sinless one, to this story of a previous existence of mine. O son of an excellent Brahmana, I was formerly a Brahmana, well read in the Vedas, and an accomplished student of the Vedangas. Through my own fault I have been degraded to my present state. A certain king, accomplished in the science of Dhanurveda, science of archery, was my friend, and from his companionship, O Brahmana, I, too, became skilled in archery, and one day the king, in company with his ministers and followed by his best warriors, went out on a hunting expedition. He killed a large number of deer near a hermitage. I, too, O good Brahmana, discharged a terrible arrow. And a rishi was wounded by that arrow with its head bent out. He fell down upon the ground, and screaming loudly said, I have harmed no one. What sinful man has done this? And, my lord, taking him for a deer, I went up to him and found that he was pierced through the body by my arrow. On account of my wicked deed, I was sorely grieved in mind. And then I said to that rishi of severe ascetic merit, who was loudly crying, lying upon the ground, I have done this unwittingly, O rishi. And also this I said to the Muni, do thou think it proper to pardon all this transgression? But, O Brahmana, the rishi, lashing himself into a fury, said to me, thou shalt be born as a cruel fowler in the Sudra class. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 215. The fowler continued, thus cursed by that rishi, I sought to propitiate him with these words, pardon me, O Muni, I have done this wicked deed unwittingly. It behooves thee to pardon all that. Do thou, worshipful sir, soothe yourself. The rishi replied, the curse that I have pronounced can never be falsified, this is certain. But from kindness towards thee, I shall do thee a favor. Though born in the Sudra class thou shalt remain a pious man, and thou shalt undoubtedly honor thy parents, and by honoring them thou shalt attain great spiritual perfection. Thou shalt also remember the events of thy past life and shalt go to heaven, and on the expiation of this curse, thou shalt again become a Brahmana. O best of men, thus, of old was I cursed by that rishi of severe power, and thus was he propitiated by me. Then, O good Brahmana, I extricated the arrow from his body, and took him into the hermitage, but he was not deprived of his life, recovered. O good Brahmana, I have thus described to thee what happened to me of old, and also how I can go to heaven hereafter. The Brahmana said, O thou of great intelligence, all men are thus subject to happiness or misery, thou shouldst not therefore grieve for that. In obedience to the customs of thy present race, thou hast pursued these wicked ways, but thou art always devoted to virtue and versed in the ways and mysteries of the world. And, O learned man, these being the duties of thy profession, the stain of evil karma will not attach to thee. And after dwelling here for some little time, thou shalt again become a Brahmana, and even now, I consider thee to be a Brahmana, there is no doubt about this. For the Brahmana who is vain and haughty, who is addicted to vices and wedded to evil and degrading practices, is like a Sudra. On the other hand, I consider a Sudra who is always adorned with these virtues, righteousness, self-restraint, and truthfulness as a Brahmana. A man becomes a Brahmana by his character. By his own evil karma a man attains an evil and terrible doom. O good man, I believe that sin in thee has now died out. Thou must not grieve for this, for men, like thee who art so virtuous and learned in the ways and mysteries of the world, can have no cause for grief. The fowler replied, the bodily afflictions should be cured with medicines, and the mental ones with spiritual wisdom. This is the power of knowledge. Knowing this, the wise should not behave like boys. Men of low intelligence are overpowered with grief at the occurrence of something which is not agreeable to them, or non-occurrence of something which is good or much desired. Indeed, all creatures are subject to this characteristic of grief or happiness. It is not merely a single creature or class that is subject to misery. Cognizant of this evil, people quickly mend their ways, and if they perceive it at the very outset, they succeed in curing it altogether. Whoever grieves for it only makes himself uneasy. Those wise men whose knowledge has made them happy and contented, and who are indifferent to happiness and misery alike, are really happy. The wise are always contented and the foolish always discontented. There is no end to discontentment, and contentment is the highest happiness. People who have reached the perfect way do not grieve, they are always conscious of the final destiny of all creatures. One must not give way to discontent, for it is like a virulent poison. It kills persons of undeveloped intelligence, just as child is killed by an enraged snake. That man has no manliness whose energies have left him and who is overpowered with perplexity when an occasion for the exercise of vigor presents itself. Our actions are surely followed by their consequences. Whoever merely gives himself up to passive indifference to worldly affairs accomplishes no good. Instead of murmuring, one must try to find out the way by which he can secure exemption from spiritual misery, and the means of salvation found, he must then free himself from sensuality. The man who has attained a high state of spiritual knowledge is always conscious of the great deficiency, instability, of all matter. Such a person, keeping in view the final doom of all, never grieves. I too, O learned man, do not grieve. I stay here, in this life, biding my time. For this reason, O best of men, I am not perplexed with doubts. The Brahmana said, Thou art wise and high in spiritual knowledge, and vast is thy intelligence. Thou who art versed in holy writ, art content with thy spiritual wisdom. I have no cause to find fault with thee. Adieu, O best of pious men, mayst thou be prosperous, and may righteousness shield thee, and mayst thou be assiduous in the practice of virtue. Markandeya continued, the fowler said to him, Be it so. And the good Brahmana walked round him and then departed. And the Brahmana returning home was duly assiduous in his attention to his old parents. I have thus, O pious Yudhishthira, narrated in detail to thee this history full of moral instruction, which thou, my good son, didst ask me to recite, the virtue of women's devotion to their husbands and that of filial piety. Yudhishthira replied, O most pious Brahmana and best of Munis, thou hast related to me this good and wonderful moral story, and listening to thee, O learned man, my time has glided away like a moment, but, O adorable sir, I am not as yet satiated with hearing this moral discourse. Footnotes 444:1 Vishada is the original. It means discontent, but here it means more a mixture of discontent, perplexity, and confusion than mere discontent. 444:2 A form of Hindu etiquette at parting. 445:1 It is so very difficult to translate the word karma, religion, and morals were invariably associated with each other in ancient Hindu mind. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 216. Vaisampayana continued, the virtuous king Yudhishthira, having listened to this excellent religious discourse, again addressed himself to the rishi Markandeya, saying, why did the fire god hide himself in water in olden times, and why is it that Angiras of great splendor officiating as fire god used to convey oblations during his dissolution? There is but one fire, but according to the nature of its action, it is seen to divide itself into many. O worshipful sir, I long to be enlightened on all these points, how the Kumara was born, how he came to be known as the son of Agni, the fire god, and how he was begotten by Rudra or Ganga and Kritika. O noble scion of Bhrigu's race, I desire to learn all this accurately as it happened. O great Muni, I am filled with great curiosity. Markandeya replied, in this connection this old story is cited by the learned, as to how the carrier of oblations, the fire god, in a fit of rage, sought the waters of the sea in order to perform a penance, and how the adorable Angiras, transforming himself into the fire god, destroyed darkness and distressed the world with his scorching rays. In olden times, O long-armed hero, the great Angiras performed a wonderful penance in his hermitage. He even excelled the fire god, the carrier of oblations, in splendor, and in that state he illumined the whole universe. At that time the fire god was also performing a penance and was greatly distressed by his, Angiras's, effulgence. He was greatly depressed, but did not know what to do. Then that adorable god thought within himself, Brahma has created another fire god for this universe. As I have been practicing austerities, my services as the presiding deity of fire have been dispensed with, and then he considered how he could re-establish himself as the god of fire. He beheld the great Muni giving heat to the whole universe like fire, and approached him slowly with fear. But Angiras said to him, do thou quickly re-establish yourself as the fire animating the universe. Thou art well known in the three stable worlds, and thou wast first created by Brahma to dispel darkness. Do thou, O destroyer of darkness, quickly occupy thine own proper place. Agni replied, my reputation has been injured now in this world. And thou art become the fire god, and people will know thee, and not me, as fire. I have relinquished my godhood of fire. Do thou become the primeval fire, and I shall officiate as the second or Prajapatyaka fire. Angiras replied, do thou become the fire god and the destroyer of darkness, and do thou attend to thy sacred duty of clearing people's way to heaven, and do thou, O Lord, make me speedily thy first child. Markandeya continued, hearing these words of Angiras, the fire god did as desired, and, O king, Angiras had a son named Vrihaspati. Knowing him to be the first son of Angiras by Agni, the gods, O Bharata, came and inquired about the mystery. And thus asked by the gods he then enlightened them, and the gods then accepted the explanation of Angiras. In this connection, I shall describe to thee religious sorts of fire of great effulgence which are here variously known in the Brahmanas by their respective uses. Footnotes. 445:2 Agni or fire was supposed to convey the oblations offered by men to the gods. 445:3 Kumara means a boy, hence a prince. Here Kartika the war god is meant. 445:4 by carrying their oblations to the gods. 446:1 portions of the Vedas. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 217. Markandeya continued, O ornament of Kuru's race, he, Angiras, who was the third son of Brahma, had a wife of the name of Subha. Do thou hear of the children he had by her? His son Vrihaspati, O king, was very famous, large-hearted, and of great bodily vigor. His genius and learning were profound, and he had a great reputation as a counselor. Bhanumti was his firstborn daughter. She was the most beautiful of all his children. Angiras' second daughter was called Raga. She was so named because she was the object of all creatures' love. Sinawali was the third daughter of Angiras. Her body was of such slender make that she was visible at one time and invisible at another, and for this reason she was likened to Rudra's daughter. Arkhismati was his fourth daughter. She was so named from her great refulgence. And his fifth daughter was called Havishmati, so named from her accepting havis or oblations. The sixth daughter of Angiras was called Mahismati the pious. O keen-witted being, the seventh daughter of Angiras is known by the name of Mohammadi, who is always present at sacrifices of great splendor, and that worshipful daughter of Angiras, whom they call unrivaled and without portion, and about whom people utter the words Kuhu Kuhu wonder, is known by the name of Kuhu. Footnotes 446:2 Raga means love. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 218. Markandeya continued, Vrishyaspati had a wife, called Tara, belonging to the lunar world. By her, he had 6 sons partaking of the energy of fire, and 1 daughter. The fire in whose honor oblations of clarified butter are offered at the Purnamasia and other sacrifices was a son of Vrishyaspati called Sanju. He was of great ascetic merit. At the Chaturmasya, 4-monthly, and Aswamedha, horse, sacrifices, animals are offered first in his honor, and this powerful fire is indicated by numerous flames. Sanju's wife was called Satya. She was of matchless beauty, and she sprang from dharma, righteousness, for the sake of truth. The blazing fire was his son, and he had 3 daughters of great religious merit. The fire which is honored with the first oblations at sacrifices is his first son called Bharadvaja. The second son of Sanju is called Bharata, in whose honor oblations of clarified butter are offered with the sacrificial ladle, called Sruk, at all the full moon, Purnamasaya, sacrifices. Beside these, 3 sons of whom Bharata is the senior, he had a son named Bharata and a daughter called Bharati. The Bharata fire is the son of Prajapati Bharata Agni, fire. And, O ornament of Bharata's race, because he is greatly honored, he is also called the Great. Veera is Bharadvaja's wife. She gave birth to Veera. It is said by the Brahmanas that he is worshipped like Soma, with the same hymns, with offerings of clarified butter. He is joined with Soma in the secondary oblation of clarified butter and is also called Rathaprabhu, Rathadwana, and Kumbharita. He begot a son named Siddhi by his wife Sarayu, and enveloped the sun with his splendor, and from being the presiding genius of the fire sacrifice he is ever mentioned in the hymns in praise of fire. And the fire Niskyavana praises the earth only, he never suffers in reputation, splendor, and prosperity. The sinless fire Satya blazing with pure flame is his son. He is free from all taint and is not defiled by sin, and is the regulator of time. That fire has another name Nishkriti, because he accomplished the Nishkriti, relief, of all blatant creatures here. When properly worshipped, he vouchsafes good fortune. His son is called Swana, who is the generator of all diseases. He inflicts severe sufferings on people for which they cry aloud, and moves in the intelligence of the whole universe. And the other fire, Vrihaspati's third son, is called Viswajit by men of spiritual wisdom. The fire, which is known as the internal heat by which the food of all creatures is digested, is the 4th son of Vrihaspati known through all the worlds, O Bharata, by the name of Viswabhuk. He is self-restrained, of great religious merit, and is a Brahmacharan, and he is worshipped by Brahmanas at the Paka sacrifices. The sacred river Gomathi was his wife, and by her all religious-minded men perform their rites. And that terrible water-drinking sea fire called Vadava is the 5th son of Vrihaspati. This Brahmic fire has a tendency to move upwards, and hence it is called Urdvabhag, and is seated in the vital air called Prana. The 6th son is called the Great Swishtakrit, for by him oblations became Swishta, Su, excellently, and Ishta, offered, and the Udagara oblation is always made in his honor. And when all creatures are claimed, the fire called Manyuti becomes filled with fury. This inexorably terrible and highly irascible fire is the daughter of Vrihaspati, and is known as Svaha, and is present in all matter. By the respective influence of the 3 qualities of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, Svaha had 3 sons. By reason of the first she had a son who was equaled by none in heaven in personal beauty, and from this fact he was surnamed by the gods as the Kamafire. By reason of the second, she had a son called the Amoga or invincible fire, the destroyer of his enemies in battle. Assured of success, he curbs his anger, and is armed with a bow and seated on a chariot and adorned with wreaths of flowers. From the action of the third quality, she had a son, the great Uktha, the means of salvation, praised by, akin to, 3 Ukthas. He is the originator of the great word and is therefore known as the Samaswasa or the means of rest, salvation. Footnotes. 448:1, is the name of the god of love, Indian Cupid. 448:2, the body, the exciting cause of our actions, is an artha, the soul of the vivifier of the body is the second artha, and the supreme spirit, the inciter of the soul, is the third. 448:3, the word of God. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 219. Markandeya continued, he, artha, performed a severe penance lasting for many years, with the view of having a pious son equal unto Brahma in reputation. And when the invocation was made with the Vairati hymns, and with the aid of the 5 sacred fires, Kasyapa, Vasistha, Prana, the son of Prana, Chayavana, the son of Angiras, and Suvarchaka, there arose a very bright energy, force, full of the animating, creative, principle, and of 5 different colors. Its head was of the color of the blazing fire, its arms were bright like the sun, and its skin and eyes were golden-colored, and its feet, O Bharata, were black. Its 5 colors were given to it by those 5 men by reason of their great penance. This celestial being is therefore described as appertaining to 5 men, and he is the progenitor of 5 tribes. After having performed a penance for 10,000 years, that being of great ascetic merit produced the terrible fire appertaining to the Pitris, Manes, in order to begin the work of creation, and from his head and mouth respectively he created Vrihat and Rathantara, day and night, who quickly steal away, life and sea. He also created Shiva from his navel, Indra from his might, and wind and fire from his soul, and from his 2 arms sprang the hymns Udatta and Anudatta. He also produced the mind, and the 5 senses, and other creatures. Having created these, he produced the 5 sons of the Pitris. Of these Pranadaya was the son of Vrihadratha. Vrihadratha was the son of Kasyapa. Bhanu was the godson of Chayavana, Saurabha, the son of Suvarchaka, and Anudatta, the son of Prana. These 25 beings are reputed to have been created by him. Tapa also created 15 other gods who obstruct sacrifices. They are Subhima, Bhima, Adabhima, Bhimavala, Avala, Sumitra, Maitravana, Midasena, Maitravardhana, and Maitradharaman, and Surapravira, Vira, Suveka, Suravarkas, and Surahantri. These gods are divided into 3 classes of 5 each. Located here in this world, they destroy the sacrifices of the gods in heaven, they frustrate their objects and spoil their oblations of clarified butter. They do this only despite the sacred fires carrying oblations to the gods. If the officiating priests are careful, they place the oblations in their honor outside of the sacrificial altar. To that particular place where the sacred fire may be placed, they cannot go. They carry the oblation of their votaries by means of wings. When appeased by hymns, they do not frustrate the sacrificial rites. Vrihadaktha, another son of Tapa, belongs to the earth. He is worshipped here in this world by pious men performing Agnihotra sacrifices. Of the son of Tapa, who is known as Rathantara, it is said by officiating priests that the sacrificial oblation offered in his honor is offered to Mitravinda. The celebrated Tapa was thus very happy with his sons. Footnotes. 448:4, in Hindu mythology there are no gods who destroy sacrifices. It is only the Asuras who do so. The Burdwan translator renders this passage 15 other gods belonging to Western nations or Asuras. It is noticeable that the beings that were denounced as Asuras by the Hindus were worshipped as gods, Asuras, by the followers of Zarathustra. 448:5, in connection with the names of these Mitra gods, it is to be remembered that Mitra was the name of the principal god of the ancient Persians. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 220. Markandeya continued, the fire called Bharata was bound by severe rules of asceticism. Pushtimati is another name of his fire, for when he is satisfied, he vouchsafes pushti, development, to all creatures, and for this reason he is called Bharata, or the cherisher. And that other fire, by name Shiva, is devoted to the worship of Sakti, the forces of the presiding deity of the forces of nature, and because he always relieves the sufferings of all creatures afflicted with misery, he is called Shiva, the giver of good. And on the acquisition of great ascetic wealth by Tapa, an intelligent son named Puranda was born to inherit the same. Another son named Ushma was also born. This fire is observed in the vapor of all matter. A third son Manu was born. He officiated as Prajapati. The Brahmanas who are learned in the Vedas then speak of the exploits of the fire Sambhu. And after that the bright Avasathya fire of great refulgence is spoken of by the Brahmanas. Tapa thus created the 5 Rajaskara fires, all bright as gold. These all share the Soma drink in sacrifices. The great sun god, when fatigued after his day's labors, is known as the Prasanta fire. He created the terrible Asuras and various other creatures of the earth. And Jairas, too, created the Prajapati Banu, the son of Tapa. He is also called Vrahadbanu, the great Banu, by Brahmanas learned in the Vedas. Banu married Supraja, and Brahadbanu the daughter of Surya, the sun god. They gave birth to 6 sons. Do thou hear of their progeny? The fire who gives strength to the weak is called Valeda, or the giver of strength. He is the first son of Banu, and that other fire who looks terrible when all the elements are in a tranquil state is called the Manjaman fire. He is the second son of Banu. And the fire in whose honor oblations of clarified butter are enjoined to be made here at the Darsa and Purnamasiya sacrifices, and who is known as Vishnu in this world, is the third son of Banu, called Anjairas or Dhridiman. And the fire to whom with Indra the Agriyana oblation is enjoined to be made is called the Agriyana fire. He is the 4th son of Banu. The 5th son of Banu is Agraha, who is the source of the oblations which are daily made for the performance of the Chaturmasya, 4 monthly, rites. And Stuva is the 6th son of Banu. Nisa was the name of another wife of that Manu who is known by the name of Banu. She gave birth to 1 daughter, the 2 Agnishomas, and also 5 other fire gods. The resplendent fire god, who is honored with the first oblations in company with the presiding deity of the clouds, is called Vaiswanara. And that other fire who is called the Lord of all the worlds is Viswapati, the 2nd son of Manu. And the daughter of Manu is called Swistakrit, because by oblations unto her one acquires great merit. Though she was the daughter of Hiranyakasipu, she yet became his wife for her evil deeds. She is, however, one of the Prajapatis. And that other fire which has its seats in the vital airs of all creatures and animates their bodies is called Sanahita. It is the cause of our perceptions of sound and form. That divine spirit whose course is marked with black and white stains, who is the supporter of fire, and who, though free from sin, is the accomplisher of desired karma, whom the wise regard as a great rishi, is the fire Kapila, the propounder of the yoga system called Sankhya. The fire through whom the elementary spirits always receive the offerings called Agra made by other creatures at the performance of all the peculiar rites in this world is called Agrani. And these other bright fires famous in the world were created for the rectification of the Agnihotra rites when marred by any defects. If the fires interlap each other by the action of the wind, then the rectification must be made with the Ashtakapala rites in honor of the fire Suchi. And if the southern fire comes in contact with the 2 other fires, then rectification must be made by the performance of the Ashtakapala rites in honor of the fire Vidi. If the fires in their place called Navisa come in contact with the fire called Devagni, then the Ashtakapala rites must be performed in honor of the fire Suchi for rectification. And if the perpetual fire is touched by a woman in her monthly course, then for rectification the Ashtakapala rites must be performed in honor of the fire called Dasiyuman. If at the time of the performance of this Agnihotra rites the death of any creature is spoken of, or if animals die, then rectification must be made with the performance of the Ashtakapala rites in honor of the Suraman fire. The Brahmana, who while suffering from a disease is unable to offer oblations to the sacred fire for 3 nights, must make amends for the same by performing the Ashtakapala rites in honor of the northern fire. He who has performed the Darsa and the Purnamasiya rites must make the rectification with the performance of the Ashtakapala rites in honor of the Patakrit fire. If the fire of a lying-in room comes in contact with the perpetual sacred fire, then rectification must be made with the performance of Ashtakapala rites in honor of the Agniman fire. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 221. Markandeya continued, Mudita, the favorite wife of the fire Svaha, used to live in water. And Svaha, who was the regent of the earth and sky, beget in that wife of his a highly sacred fire called Advanta. There is a tradition amongst learned Brahmanas that this fire is the ruler and inner soul of all creatures. He is worshipful, resplendent, and the lord of all the great Buddhas here. And that fire, under the name of Grihapati, is ever worshipped at all sacrifices and conveys all the oblations that are made in this world. That great son of Svaha, the great Adbhuta fire, is the soul of the waters and the prince and regent of the sky and the lord of everything great. His son, the Bharata fire, consumes the dead bodies of all creatures. His first kratu is known as Niyata at the performance of the Agnishtoma sacrifice. That powerful prime fire, Svaha, is always missed by the gods, because when he sees Niyata approaching him, he hides himself in the sea from fear of contamination. Searching for him in every direction, the gods could not, once, find him out, and on beholding Atharvan, the fire said to him, O valiant being, do thou carry the oblations for the gods? I am disabled from want of strength. Attaining the state of the red-eyed fire, do thou condescend to do me this favor? Having thus advised Atharvan, the fire went away to some other place. But his place of concealment was divulged by the Finni tribe. Upon them the fire pronounced this curse in anger, You shall be the food of all creatures in various ways. And then that carrier of oblations spoke unto Atharvan as before. Though entreated by the gods, he did not agree to continue carrying their oblations. He then became insensible and instantly gave up the ghost. And leaving his material body, he entered into the bowels of the earth. Coming into contact with the earth, he created the different metals. Force and scent arose from his pus, the deodar pine from his bones, glass from his phlegm, the maricotta jewel from his bile, and the black iron from his liver. And all the world has been embellished with these three substances, wood, stone, and iron. The clouds were made from his nails, and corals from his veins. And, O king, various other metals were produced from his body. Thus, leaving his material body, he remained absorbed in spiritual meditation. He was roused by the penance of Bhrigu and Angiras. The powerful fire, thus gratified with penance, blazed forth intensely. But on beholding the rishi, Atharvan, he again sought his watery refuse. At this extinction of the fire, the whole world was frightened, and sought the protection of Atharvan, and the gods and others began to worship him. Atharvan rummaged the whole sea in the presence of all those beings eager with expectation, and finding out the fire, himself began the work of creation. Thus in olden times the fire was destroyed and called back to life by the adorable Atharvan. But now he invariably carries the oblations of all creatures. Living in the sea and traveling about various countries, he produced the various fires mentioned in the Vedas. The river Indus, the 5 rivers of the Punjab, the Son, the Devika, the Sarasvati, the Ganga, the Satakumba, the Sarayu, the Gandaki, the Charmanwadi, the Mahi, the Madha, the Medhatithi, the 3 rivers Tamravati, the Vaithravati, and the Kausaki, the Tamasa, the Narmada, the Godavari, the Vina, the Upavina, the Bhima, the Vadawa, the Bharati, the Suprayoga, the Kaveri, the Marmara, the Tungavena, the Krishnavena, and the Kapila. These rivers, O Bharata, are said to be the mothers of the fires. The fire called Adbhuta had a wife of the name of Priya, and Vibhu was the eldest of his sons by her. There are as many different kinds of soma sacrifices as the number of fires mentioned before. All this race of fires, firstborn of the spirit of Brahma, sprang also from the race of Atri. Atri in his own mind conceived these sons, desirous of extending the creation. By this act, the fires came out of his own Brahmic frame. I have thus narrated to thee the history of the origin of these fires. They are great, resplendent, and unrivaled in power, and they are the destroyers of darkness. Know that the powers of those fires are the same as those of the Adbhuta fire as related in the Vedas. For all these fires are one and same. This adorable being, the firstborn fire, must be considered as one. For like the Jyotishtoma sacrifice, he came out of Angira's body in various forms. I have thus described to thee the history of the great race of Agni, fires, who when duly worshipped with the various hymns, carry the oblations of all creatures to the gods. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 222. Markandeya continued, O sinless scion of Kuru's race, I have described to thee the various branches of the race of Agni. Listen now to the story of the birth of the intelligent Kartikeya. I shall tell thee of that wonderful and famous and highly energetic son of the Adbhuta fire, begotten of the wives of the Brahmarshis. In ancient times the gods and asuras were very active in destroying one another. And the terrible asuras always succeeded in defeating the gods. And Purandara, Indra, beholding the great slaughter of his armies by them and anxious to find out a leader for the celestial host, thought within himself, I must find out a mighty person who, observing the ranks of the celestial army shattered by the Danavas, will be able to reorganize it with vigor. He then repaired to the Manasa mountains and was there deeply absorbed in thought of nature, when he heard the heart-rending cries of a woman to the effect, "May someone come quick and rescue me, and either indicate a husband for me, or be my husband himself." Purandara said to her, "Do not be afraid, lady." And having said these words, he saw Kasan, an asura, adorned with a crown and mace in hand, standing even like a hill of metals at a distance and holding that lady by the hand. Vyasa addressed then that asura, saying, "Why art thou bent on behaving insolently to this lady? Know that I am the god who wields the thunderbolt. Refrain thou from doing any violence to this lady." To him Kasan replied, "Do thou, O Sakra, leave her alone. I desire to possess her. Thinkest thou, O slayer of Paka, that thou shalt be able to return home with thy life?" With these words Kasan hurled his mace for slaying Indra. Vyasa cut it up in its course with his thunderbolt. Then Kasan, furious with rage, hurled a huge mass of rock at him. Beholding that, he of 100 sacrifices rent it asunder with his thunderbolt, and it fell down upon the ground. And Kasan himself was wounded by that falling mass of rock. Thus sorely afflicted, he fled, leaving the lady behind. And when the asura was gone, Indra said to that lady, "Who and whose wife art thou, O lady with a beautiful face, and what has brought thee here?" Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 223. The lady replied, "I am a daughter of Prajapati, the lord of all creatures, Brahma, and my name is Devasena. My sister Daidyasena has ere this been ravished by Kasan. We two sisters with our maids habitually used to come to these Manasa mountains for pleasures with the permission of Prajapati. And the great asura Kasan used daily to pay his court to us. Daidyasena, O conqueror of Paka, listened to him, but I did not. Daidyasena was, therefore, taken away by him, but, O illustrious one, thou hast rescued me with thy might. And now, O Lord of the Celestials, I desire that thou shouldst select an invincible husband for me." To this Indra replied, "Thou art a cousin of mine, thy mother being a sister of my mother Dakshini, and now I desire to hear thee relate thine own prowess." The lady replied, "O hero with long arms, I am Avala, weak, but my husband must be powerful. And by the potency of my father's boon, he will be respected by gods and asuras alike." Indra said, "O blameless creature, I wish to hear from thee what sort of power thou wishest thy husband to possess." The lady replied, "That manly and famous and powerful being devoted to Brahma, who is able to conquer all the celestials, asuras, yakshas, kinnaras, uragas, rakshasas, and the evil-minded daityas, and to subdue all the worlds with thee, shall be my husband." Markandeya continued, "On hearing her speech, Indra was grieved and deeply thought within himself, there is no husband for this lady, answering to her own description. And that god adorned with sun-like effulgence, then perceived the sun rising on the Udaya hill, and the great Soma, moon, gliding into the sun. It being the time of the new moon, he of 100 sacrifices, at the Raudra moment, observed the gods and asuras fighting on the sunrise hill. And he saw that the morning twilight was tinged with red clouds. And he also saw that the abode of Varuna had become blood-red. And he also observed Agni conveying oblations offered with various hymns by Bhrigu, and Jairas, and others, and entering the disk of the sun. And he further saw the 24 parvas adorning the sun, and the terrible Soma also present in the sun under such surroundings. And observing this union of the sun and the moon and that fearful conjunction of theirs, Sakra thought within himself, this terrific conjunction of the sun and the moon forebodeth a fearful battle on the morrow. And the river Sindhu, Indus, too is flowing with a current of fresh blood, and the jackals with fiery laces are crying to the sun. This great conjunction is fearful and full of energy. This union of the moon, Soma, with the sun and Agni is very wonderful. And if Soma giveth birth to a son now, that son may become the husband of this lady. And Agni also hath similar surroundings now, and he too is a god. If the two begetteth a son, that son may become the husband of this lady. With these thoughts that illustrious celestial repaired to the regions of Brahma, taking Devasena with him. And saluting the grandsire, he said unto him, Do thou fix a renowned warrior as husband of this lady. Brahma replied, O slayer of Asuras, it shall be, as thou hast intended. The issue of that union will be mighty and powerful accordingly. That powerful being will be the husband of this lady and the joint leader of thy forces with thee. Thus addressed, the Lord of the Celestials and the lady bowed unto him, and then repaired to the place where those great Brahmanas, the powerful celestial rishis, Vasistha and others, lived. And with Indra at their head, the other gods also, desirous of drinking the Soma beverage, repaired to the sacrifices of those rishis to receive their respective shares of the offerings. Having duly performed the ceremonies with the bright blazing fire, those great-minded persons offered oblations to the celestials. And the Adbhuta fire, that carrier of oblations, was invited with mantras. And coming out of the solar disk, that lordly fire duly repaired thither, restraining speech. And, O chief of Bharata's race, that fire entering the sacrificial fire that had been ignited and into which various offerings were made by the rishis with recitations of hymns, took them with him and made them over to the dwellers of heaven. And while returning from that place, he observed the wives of those high-souled rishis sleeping at their ease on their beds. And those ladies had a complexion beautiful like that of an altar of gold, spotless like moonbeams, resembling fiery flames and looking like blazing stars. And seeing those wives of the illustrious Brahmanas with eager eyes, his mind became agitated and he was smitten with their charms. Restraining his heart, he considered it improper for him to be thus agitated. And he said unto himself, The wives of these great Brahmanas are chaste and faithful and beyond the reach of other people's desires. I am filled with desire to possess them. I cannot lawfully cast my eyes upon them, nor ever touch them when they are not filled with desire. I shall, therefore, gratify myself daily with only looking at them by becoming their Garhapesha, household, fire. Markandeya continued, the Adbhuta fire, thus transforming himself into a household one, was highly gratified with seeing those gold-complexioned ladies and touching them with his flames. And influenced by their charms he dwelt there for a long time, giving them his heart and filled with an intense love for them. And baffled in all his efforts to win the hearts of those Brahmana ladies, and his own heart tortured by love, he repaired to a forest with the certain object of destroying himself. A little while before, Svaha, the daughter of Deksha, had bestowed her love on him. The excellent lady had been endeavoring for a long time to detect his weak moments, but that blameless lady did not succeed in finding out any weakness in the calm and collected fire god. But now that the god had betaken himself to a forest, actually tortured by the pangs of love, she thought, as I too am distressed with love, I shall assume the guise of the wives of the 7 rishis, and in that disguise I shall seek the fire god so smitten with their charms. This done, he will be gratified and my desire too will be satisfied. Footnotes 453:1 Avala is a common name of women. It means one who has no vala or strength or power. The word is also used as an adjective. 453:2 According to the Hindus, the sun rises from and sets behind 2 hills respectively. He rises from the Udaya or sunrise hill and sets behind the Asta or sunset hill. 453:3 Rudra belonging to Rudra, the god of fury, violence, war, and sea. 454:1 Devasena literally means the celestial army. This fable seems to be an allegorical representation of the attempts made by Indra to procure a leader for the celestial host. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 224. Markandeya continued, O Lord of men, the beautiful Shiva endowed with great virtues and an unspotted character was the wife of Angiras, one of the 7 rishis. That excellent lady, Svaha, at first assuming the disguise of Shiva, sought the presence of Agni, unto whom she said, O Agni, I am tortured with love for thee. Do thou think it fit to woo me? And if thou dost not accede to my request, know that I shall commit self-destruction. I am Shiva, the wife of Angiras. I have come here according to the advice of the wives of the other rishis, who have sent me here after due deliberation." Agni replied, "How didst thou know that I was tortured with love, and how could the others, the beloved wives of the 7 rishis, of whom thou hast spoken, know this?" Svaha replied, "Thou art always a favorite with us, but we are afraid of thee. Now, having read thy mind by well-known signs, they have sent to thy presence. I have come here to gratify my desire. Be thou quick, O Agni, to encompass the object of thy desire. My sisters-in-law are awaiting me. I must return soon." Markandeya continued, "Then Agni, filled with great joy and delight, married Svaha in the guise of Shiva, and that lady, joyfully cohabiting with him, held the semen virile in her hands. And then she thought within herself that those who would observe her in that disguise in the forest would cast an unmerited slur upon the conduct of those Brahmana ladies in connection with Agni. Therefore, to prevent this, she should assume the disguise of a bird, and in that state she should more easily get out of the forest." Markandeya continued, "Then assuming the disguise of a winged creature, she went out of the forest and reached the white mountain begirt with clumps of heath and other plants and trees, and guarded by strange 7-headed serpents with poison in their very looks, and abounding with rakshasas, male and female pisachas, terrible spirits, and various kinds of birds and animals. That excellent lady, quickly ascending a peak of those mountains, threw that semen into a golden lake. And then, assuming successively the forms of the wives of the high-souled 7 rishis, she continued to dally with Agni. But on account of the great ascetic merit of Arundhati and her devotion to her husband, Vasishtha, she was unable to assume her form. And, O chief of Kuru's race, the lady Svaha on the first lunar day threw 6 times into that lake the semen of Agni. And thrown there, it produced a male child endowed with great power. And from the fact of its being regarded by the rishis as cast off, the child born therefrom came to be called by the name of Skanda. And the child had 6 faces, 12 ears, as many eyes, hands, and feet, 1 neck, and 1 stomach. And it first assumed a form on the 2nd lunar day, and it grew to the size of a little child on the 3rd. And the limbs of Guha were developed on the 4th day. And being surrounded by masses of red clouds flashing forth lightning, it shone like the sun rising in the midst of a mass of red clouds. And seizing the terrific and immense bow which was used by the destroyer of the Asura Tripura for the destruction of the enemies of the gods, that mighty being uttered such a terrible roar that the 3 worlds with their mobile and immobile divisions became struck with awe. And hearing that sound, which seemed like the rumbling of a mass of big clouds, the great Nagas, Chitra and Airavata, were shaken with fear. And seeing them unsteady, that lad shining with sun-like refulgence held them with both his hands. And with a dart in another hand, and with a stout, red-crested, big cock fast secured in another, that long-armed son of Agni began to sport about, making a terrible noise. And holding an excellent conch shell with 2 of his hands, that mighty being began to blow it to the great terror of even the most powerful creatures. And striking the air with 2 of his hands, and playing about on the hilltop, the mighty Mahasena of unrivaled prowess looked as if he were on the point of devouring the 3 worlds, and shone like the bright sun god at the moment of his ascension in the heavens. And that being of wonderful prowess and matchless strength, seated on the top of that hill, looked on with his numerous faces directed towards the different cardinal points, and observing various things, he repeated his loud roars. And on hearing those roars, various creatures were prostrate with fear. And frightened and troubled in mind, they sought protection. And all those persons of various orders who then sought the protection of that god are known as his powerful Brahmana followers. And rising from his seat, that mighty god allayed the fears of all those people, and then drawing his bow, he discharged his arrows in the direction of the White Mountain. And with those arrows the hill Krauncha, the son of Himavat, was rent asunder. And that is the reason why swans and vultures now migrate to the Sumeru Mountains. The Krauncha hill, sorely wounded, fell down uttering fearful groans. And seeing him fallen, the other hills too began to scream. And that mighty being of unrivaled prowess, hearing the groans of the afflicted, was not at all moved, but himself uplifting his mace, yelled forth his war-whoop. And that high-souled being then hurled his mace of great luster and quickly rent in twain one of the peaks of the White Mountain. And the White Mountain, being thus pierced by him, was greatly afraid of him, and dissociating himself from the earth, fled with the other mountains. And the earth was greatly afflicted and bereft of her ornaments on all sides. And in this distress she went over to Skanda and once more shone with all her might. And the mountains too bowed down to Skanda and came back and stuck into the earth. And all creatures then celebrated the worship of Skanda on the 5th day of the lunar month. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 225. Markandeya continued, when that powerful, high-souled, and mighty being was born, various kinds of fearful phenomena occurred. And the nature of males and females, of heat and cold, and of such other pairs of contraries, was reversed. And the planets, the cardinal points in the firmaments became radiant with light, and the earth began to rumble very much. And the rishis even, seeking the welfare of the world, while they observed all these terrific prodigies on all sides, began with anxious hearts to restore tranquility in the universe. And those who used to live in that Kshatrartha forest said, this very miserable condition of ours hath been brought about by Agni cohabiting with the 6 wives of the 7 rishis. Others again, who had seen the goddess assume the disguise of a bird, said, this evil hath been brought about by a bird. No one ever imagined that Svaha was the authoress of that mischief. But having heard that the newborn male child was hers, she went to Skanda and gradually revealed to him the fact that she was his mother. And those 7 rishis, when they heard that a son of great power had been born to them, divorced their 6 wives with the exception of the adorable Arundhati, because all the dwellers of that forest protested that those 6 persons had been instrumental in bringing forth the child. Svaha too, O king, said again and again to the 7 rishis, saying, ye ascetics, this child is mine, your wives are not his mother. The great Muni Viswamitra had, after the conclusion of the sacrifices of the 7 rishis, followed unseen the god of fire, while the latter was tortured with lust. He, therefore, knew everything as it happened, and he was the first to seek the protection of Mahasena. And he offered divine prayers to Mahasena, and all the 13 auspicious rites appertaining to childhood, such as the natal and other ceremonies, were all performed by the great Muni in respect of that child. And for the good of the world he promulgated the virtues of the 6-faced Skanda, and performed ceremonies in honor of the cock, the goddess Sakti, and the first followers of Skanda. And for this reason he became a great favorite of the celestial youth. That great Muni then informed the 7 rishis of the transformations of Svaha and told them that their wives were perfectly innocent. But though thus informed, the 7 rishis abandoned their spouses unconditionally. Markandeya continued, the celestials having heard of the prowess of Skanda, all said to Vasva, O Sakra, do thou kill Skanda without delay, for his prowess is unbearable. And if thou dost not exterminate him, he will conquer the 3 worlds with ourselves, and overpowering thee, will himself become the mighty lord of the celestials. Perplexed in mind, Sakra replied unto them, this child is endowed with great prowess. He can himself destroy the creator of the universe, and battle putting forth his might. I venture not, therefore, to do away with him. To this the gods replied, thou hast no manliness in thee, and that thou talkest in this manner. Let the great mothers of the universe repair today to Skanda. They can master at will any degree of energy. Let them kill this child. It shall be so, the mothers replied. And then they went away. But on beholding that he was possessed of great might, they became dispirited, and considering that he was invincible, they sought his protection and said unto him, do thou, O mighty being, become our adopted son. We are full of affection for thee and desirous of giving thee suck. Lo, the milk oozes from our breasts. On hearing these words, the mighty Mahasena became desirous of sucking their breasts, and he received them with due respect and acceded to their request. And that mightiest of mighty creatures then beheld his father Agni come towards him. And that god, who was the doer of all that is good, was duly honored by his son, and in company with the mothers, he stayed there by the side of Mahasena to tend him. And that lady amongst the mothers who was born of anger with a spike in hand kept watch over Skanda, even like a mother guarding her own offspring, and that irascible red-colored daughter of the sea, who lived herself on blood, hugged Mahasena in her breast and nursed him like a mother. And Agni, transforming himself into a traitor with a goat's mouth and followed by numerous children, began to gratify that child of his with toys in that mountain abode of his. Footnotes. 458:1 Anger personified is a deity. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 226. Markandeya continued, the planets with their satellites, the rishis and the mothers, Agni and numerous other blazing courtiers, and many other dwellers of heaven of terrible mien, waited on Mahasena along with the mothers. And the illustrious sovereign of the gods, desirous of victory but believing success to be doubtful, mounted his elephant Airavata and, attended by the other gods, advanced towards Skanda. That mighty being, followed by all the celestials, was armed with his thunderbolt. And with the object of slaying Mahasena, he marched with terrible celestial army of great splendor, sounding their shrill warcry and furnished with various sorts of standards, with warriors encased in various armor and armed with numerous bows and riding on various animals. When Mahasena beheld the gloriously decked Sakra, attired in his best clothes, advancing with the determination of slaying him, he, too, on his part, advanced to meet that chief of the celestials. O Partha, the mighty Vasva, the lord of the celestials, then uttered a loud shout, to encourage his warriors, and marching rapidly with the view of killing Agni's son, and praised by Tridesas and great rishis, he at length reached the abode of Kartikeya. And then he shouted out with other gods, and Gula too in response to this, uttered a fearful warcry resembling the roaring of the sea. On hearing that noise, the celestial army behaved like an agitated sea, and was stunned and fixed to the spot. And that son of Pavaka, the fire god, beholding the gods come near to him with the object of killing him, was filled with wrath, and gave out rising flame of fire from within his mouth. And these flames destroyed the celestial forces struggling on the ground. Their heads, their bodies, their arms, and riding animals were all burnt in that conflagration, and they appeared all on a sudden like stars displaced from their proper spheres. Thus afflicted, the god renounced all allegiance to the thunderbolt, and sought the protection of Pavaka's son, and thus peace was again secured. When he was thus forsaken by the gods, Sakra hurled his thunderbolt at Skanda. It pierced him on the right side, and, O great king, it passed through the body of that high-souled being. And from being struck with the thunderbolt, there arose from Skanda's body another being, a youth with a club in hand, and adorned with a celestial amulet. And because he was born on account of the piercing of the thunderbolt, he was named Visakha. And Indra, when he beheld that another person looking like the fierce destroying fire god had come into being, was frightened out of his wits, and besought the protection of Skanda, with the palms of his hands joined together, as a mark of respect. And that excellent being Skanda bade him renounce all fear, with his arm. The gods were then transported with joy, and their hands too struck up. Footnotes. 459:1 Another name of gods, so named from their having only 3 stages of life, viz., infancy, childhood, and youth, and being exempt from the 4th old age. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 227. Markandeya continued, now hear of those terrible and curious-looking followers of Skanda. A number of male children came into being when Skanda was struck with the thunderbolt, those terrific creatures that steal spirit away, little children, whether born or in the womb, and a number of female children too of great strength were born to him. Those children adopted Visakha as their father. That adorable and dexterous Bhadrasakha, having a face like that of a goat, was at the time of the battle surrounded by all his sons and daughters, whom he guarded carefully in the presence of the great mothers. And for this reason the inhabitants of this earth call Skanda, the father of Kumaras, little children. Those persons who desire to have sons born to them worship in their places the powerful Rudra in the form of the fire god, and Uma in the form of Svaha. And by that means they are blessed with sons. The daughters begotten by the fire god, Tapa, went over to Skanda, who said to them, "What can I do for you?" Those girls replied, "Do us this favor. By thy blessing, may we become the good and respected mothers of all the world." He replied, "Be it so." And that liberal-minded being repeated again and again, "Ye shall be divided into Shiva and Asaiva." And the mothers then departed, having first established Skanda's sonship, Kaki, Halima, Malini, Vrinhila, Arya, Palala, and Vimitra. These were the 7 mothers of Sisu. They had a powerful, red-eyed, terrific, and very turbulent son named Sisu, born by the blessing of Skanda. He was reputed as the 8th hero, born of the mothers of Skanda. But he is also known as the 9th, when that being with the face of a goat is included. Know that the 6th face of Skanda was like that of a goat. That face, O king, is situated in the middle of the 6, and is regarded constantly by the mother. That head by which Bhadrasaka created the divine energy is reputed to be the best of all his heads, O ruler of men. These virtuous, wonderful events happened on the 5th day of the bright half of the lunar month, and on the 6th, a very fierce and terrific battle was fought at that place. Footnotes. For 60:1 IE, Good and Evil Spirits. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 228. Markandeya continued, Skanda was adorned with a golden amulet and wreath, and wore a crest and a crown of gold. His eyes were golden-colored, and he had a set of sharp teeth. He was dressed in a red garment and looked very handsome. He had a comely appearance, and was endowed with all good characteristics, and was the favorite of the 3 worlds. He granted boons to people who sought them, and was brave, youthful, and adorned with bright earrings. Whilst he was reposing himself, the goddess of fortune, looking like a lotus and assuming a personal embodiment, rendered her allegiance to him. When he became thus possessed of good fortune, that famous and delicate-looking creature appeared to all like the moon at its full. And high-minded Brahmanas worshipped that mighty being, and the Maharshis, great rishis, then said as follows to Skanda, O thou born of the golden egg, mayst thou be prosperous and mayst thou become an instrument of good to the universe. O best of the gods, although thou wast born only 6 days ago, the whole world has owned allegiance to thee within this short time, and thou hast also allayed their fears. Therefore do thou become the Indra, lord, of the 3 worlds, and remove their cause of apprehension. Skanda replied, You gentlemen of great ascetic wealth, tell me, what Indra does with all 3 worlds, and how that sovereign of the celestials protects the hosts of gods unremittingly. The rishis replied, Indra is the giver of strength, power, children, and happiness to all creatures, and when propitiated, that lord of the celestials bestows on all the objects of their desire. He destroys the wicked and fulfills the desires of the righteous, and that destroyer of Vala assigns to all creatures their various duties. He officiates for the sun and the moon in places where there is no sun or moon. He, even when occasion requires it, Acts 4, serves the purposes of fire, air, earth, and water. These are the duties of Indra. His capacities are immense. Thou too art mighty, therefore great hero, do thou become our Indra. Sakra said, O mighty being, do thou make us happy by becoming our lord. Excellent being, thou art worthy of the honor, therefore shall we anoint thee this very day. Skanda replied, Do thou continue to rule the 3 worlds with self-possession, and with thy heart bent on conquest. I shall remain thy humble servant. I covet not thy sovereignty. Sakra replied, Thy prowess is unrivaled, O hero, do thou therefore vanquish the enemies of the gods. People have been struck with wonder at thy prowess. More especially as I have been bereft of my prowess, and defeated by thee. Now if I were to act as Indra, I should not command the respect of all creatures, and they would be busy in bringing about dissensions between us, and then, my lord, they would become the partisans of one or other of us. And when they formed themselves into 2 distinct factions, war as before would be the result of that defection. And in that war, thou wouldst undoubtedly defeat me without difficulty, and thyself become the lord of all worlds. Skanda replied, Thou, O Sakra, art my sovereign, as also of the 3 worlds, mayst thou be prosperous. Tell me if I can obey any commands of thine. Indra replied, At thy bidding, O powerful being, I shall continue to act as Indra. And if thou hast said this deliberately and in earnest, then hear me how thou canst gratify thy desire of serving me. Do thou, O mighty being, take the leadership of the celestial forces accordingly. Skanda replied, Do thou anoint me as leader, for the destruction of the Danavas, for the good of the celestials, and for the well-being of cows and Brahmanas. Markandeya continued, thus anointed by Indra and all other gods, and honored by the Maharshis, he looked grand at the moment. The golden umbrella held over his head looked like a halo of blazing fire. That famous god, the conqueror of Tripura, himself fastened the celestial wreath of gold of Viswakarma's manufacture round his neck. And, O great man and conqueror of thine enemies, that worshipful god with the emblem of the bull had gone there previously with Parvati. He honored him with a joyous heart. The fire god is called Rudra by Brahmanas, and from this fact Skanda is called the son of Rudra. The White Mountain was formed from discharges of Rudra's semen virile, and the sensual indulgences of the fire god with the Kritikas took place on that same White Mountain. And as Rudra was seen by all the dwellers of heaven to heap honors on the excellent Guha, Skanda, he was for that reason reputed as the son of Rudra. This child had his being by the action of Rudra entering into the constitution of the fire god, and for this reason, Skanda came to be known as the son of Rudra. And, O Bharata, as Rudra, the fire god, Svaha, and the 6 wives of the 7 rishis were instrumental to the birth of the great god Skanda, he was for that reason reputed as the son of Rudra. That son of fire god was clad in a pair of clean red cloths, and thus he looked grand and resplendent like the sun peeping forth from behind a mass of red clouds. And the red cock given to him by the fire god formed his ensign, and when perched on the top of his chariot, it looked like the image of the all-destroying fire. And the presiding deity of the power which conduces to the victory of the god, and which is the director of the exertions of all creatures, and constitutes their glory, prop, and refuge, advanced before him. And a mysterious charm entered into his constitution, the charm which manifests its powers on the battlefield. Beauty, strength, piety, power, might, truthfulness, rectitude, devotion to Brahmanas, freedom from illusion or perplexity, protection of followers, destruction of foes, and care of all creatures, these, O Lord of men, are the inborn virtues of Skanda. Thus anointed by all the gods, he looked pleased and complacent, and dressed in his best style, he looked beautiful like the moon at its full. The much-esteemed incantation of Vedic hymns, the music of the celestial band, and the psalms of gods and Gandharvas then rang on all sides. And surrounded by all the well-dressed apsaras, and many other gay and happy-looking pisachas and hosts of gods, that anointed, by gods, son of Pavaka disported himself in all his grandeur. To the dwellers of heaven, the anointed Mahasena appeared like the sun rising after extinction of darkness. And then the celestial forces, looking upon him as their leader, surrounded him on all sides in thousands. That adorable being, followed by all creatures, then assumed their commands, and praised and honored by them, he encouraged them in return. The performer of 1,000 sacrifices then thought of Devasena, whom he has rescued before. And considering that this being, Skanda, was undoubtedly destined to be the husband of this lady by Brahma himself, he had her brought there, dressed her with the best apparel. And the vanquisher of Vala then said to Skanda, O foremost of gods, this lady was, even before thy birth, destined to be thy bride by that self-existent being. Therefore do thou duly accept her lotus-like beautiful right hand with invocation of the marital hymns. Thus told, he duly married her. And Vrihaspati learned in hymns, performed the necessary prayers and oblations. She who is called Shashti, Lakshmi, Asa, Sukaprata, Sinavali, Kuhu, Sivriti, and Aprajita, is known among men as Devasena, the wife of Skanda. When Skanda became united to Devasena in indissoluble bonds of matrimony, then the gods of prosperity in her own personal embodiment began to serve him with diligence. As Skanda attained celebrity on the 5th lunar day, that day is called Tripanchami, or the auspicious 5th day, and as he attained his object on the 6th, that lunar day is considered to be of great moment. Footnotes. 461:1 One of the ensigns of royalty in Hindustan. 462:1 Brahma. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 229. Markandeya continued, those 6 ladies, the wives of the 7 rishis, when they learned that good fortune had smiled on Mahasena and that he had been made leader of the celestial forces, repaired to his camp. Those virtuous ladies of high religious merit had been disowned by the rishis. They lost no time in visiting that leader of the celestial forces, and then addressed him thus: "We, O son, have been cast out by our godlike husbands, without any cause. Some people spread the rumor that we gave birth to thee." Believing in the truth of this story, they became greatly indignant, and banished us from our sacred places. It behooves thee now to save us from this infamy. We desire to adopt thee as our son, so that, O mighty being, eternal bliss may be secured to us by that favor. Do thou thus repay the obligation thou owest to us." Skandar replied, "O ladies of faultless character, do you accordingly become my mothers. I am your son, and ye shall attain all the objects of your desire." Markandeya continued, "Then Sakra, having expressed a wish to say something to Skandar, the latter inquired, "What is it?" Being told by Skandar to speak it out, Vasva said, "The lady Abhijit, the younger sister of Rohini, being jealous of her seniority, has repaired to the woods to perform austerities. And I am at a loss to find out a substitute for the fallen star. May good luck attend on thee. Do thou consult with Brahma, for the purpose of filling up the room of this great asterism." Dhanishta and other asterisms were created by Brahma, and Rohini used to serve the purpose of one such, and consequently their number was full. And in accordance with Sakra's advice, Kritika was assigned a place in the heavens, and that star presided over by Agni shines as if with 7 heads. Vinata also said to Skandar, "Thou art as a son to me, and entitled to offer me the funeral cakes at my funeral obsequies. I desire, my son, to live with thee always." Skandar replied, "Be it so, all honor to thee. Do thou guide me with a mother's affection, and honored by thy daughter-in-law, thou shalt always live with me." Markandeya continued, "Then the great mothers spoke as follows to Skandar: We have been described by the learned as the mothers of all creatures. But we desire to be thy mothers, do thou honor us." Skandar replied, "Ye are all as mothers to me, and I am your son. Tell me what I can do to please you." The mothers replied, "The ladies, Brahmi, Maheshwari, and C, were appointed as mothers of the world in bygone ages. We desire, O great God, that they be dispossessed of that dignity, and ourselves installed in their place, and that we, instead of them, be worshipped by the world. Do thou now restore to us those of our progeny, of whom we have been deprived, by them on thy account." Skandar replied, "Ye shall not recover those that have been once given away, but I can give you other offspring if ye like." The mothers replied, "We desire that living with thee and assuming different shapes we be able to eat up the progeny of those mothers and their guardians. Do thou grant us this favor?" Skandar said, "I can grant you progeny, but this topic on which ye have just now dilated is a very painful one. May ye be prosperous. All honor to you, ladies, do ye vouchsafe to them your protecting care." The mothers replied, "We shall protect them, O Skandar, as thou desirest. Mayst thou be prosperous. But, O mighty being, we desire to live with thee always." Skandar replied, "So long as children of the humankind do not attain the youthful state in the 16th year of their age, ye shall afflict them with your various forms, and I too shall confer on you a fierce inexhaustible spirit. And with that ye shall live happily, worshipped by all." Markandeya continued, "And then a fiery powerful being came out of the body of Skandar for the purpose of devouring the progeny of mortal beings. He fell down upon the ground, senseless and hungry. And bidden by Skandar, that genius of evil assumed a terrific form. Skandapasmara is the name by which it is known among good Brahmanas. Vinata is called the terrific Sakuni Graha, spirit of evil. She who is known as Pudana Rakshasi by the learned is the Graha called Pudana. That fierce and terrible-looking Rakshasa of a hideous appearance is also called the Pisacha, Sita Pudana. That fierce-looking spirit is the cause of abortion in women. Aditi is also known by the name of Revti. Her evil spirit is called Revata, and that terrible Graha also afflicts children. Dithi, the mother of the Daityas, Asuras, is also called Mukhamandika, and that terrible creature is very fond of the flesh of little children. Those male and female children, O Kaurava, who are said to have been begotten by Skanda, are spirit of evil, and they destroy the fetus in the womb. They, the Kamaras, are known as the husbands of those very ladies, and children are seized unawares by these cruel spirits. And, O king, Sarabi, who is called the mother of bovine kind by the wise, is best ridden by the evil spirit Sakuni, who in company with her devours children on this earth. And Sarama, the mother of dogs, also habitually kills human beings while still in the womb. She who is the mother of all trees has her abode in a karanja tree. She grants boons and has a placid countenance and is always favorably disposed towards all creatures. Those persons who desire to have children bow down to her, who is seated in a karanja tree. These 18 evil spirits fond of meat and wine, and others of the same kind, invariably take up their abode in the lying-in room for 10 days. Kadru introduces herself in a subtle form into the body of a pregnant woman, and there she causes the destruction of the fetus, and the mother is made to give birth to a naga, serpent. And that mother of the Gandharvas takes away the fetus, and for this reason, conception in woman turns out to be abortive. The mother of the Apsaras removes the fetus from the womb, and for this reason such conceptions are said to be stationary by the learned. The daughter of the divinity of the Red Sea is said to have nursed Skanda. She is worshipped under the name of Lohitayani on Kadamva trees. Arya acts the same part among female beings as Rudra does among male ones. She is the mother of all children and is distinctly worshipped for their welfare. These that I have described are the evil spirits presiding over the destinies of young children, and until children attain their 16th year, these spirits exercise their influence for evil, and after that, for good. The whole body of male and female spirits that I have now described are always denominated by men as the spirits of Skanda. They are propitiated with burnt offerings, ablutions, unguents, sacrifices, and other offerings, and particularly by the worship of Skanda. And, O king, when they are honored and worshipped with due reverence, they bestow on men whatever is good for them, as also valor and long life. And now, having bowed down to Mahesvara, I shall describe the nature of those spirits who influence the destinies of men after they have attained their 16th year. The man who beholds gods while sleeping, or in a wakeful state, soon turns mad, and the spirit under whose influence these hallucinations take place is called the celestial spirit. When a person beholds his dead ancestors while he is seated at ease, or lying in his bed, he soon loses his reason, and the spirit which causes this illusion of sensible perception is called the ancestral spirit. The man who shows disrespect to the Siddhas and who is cursed by them in return soon runs mad, and the evil influence by which this is brought about is called the Siddha spirit. And the spirit by whose influence a man smells sweet odor and becomes cognizant of various tastes when there are no odoriferous or tasteful substances about him, and soon becomes tormented, is called the Rakshasa spirit. And the spirit by whose action celestial musicians, Gandharvas, blend their existence into the constitution of a human being and make him run mad in no time is called the Gandharv spirit. And that evil spirit by whose influence men are always tormented by Pisachas is called the Pisacha spirit. When the spirit of Yakshas enters into the system of a human being by some accident, he loses his reason immediately, and such a spirit is called the Yaksha spirit. The man who loses his reason on account of his mind being demoralized with vices runs mad in no time, and his illness must be remedied according to methods prescribed in the Sastras. Men also run mad from perplexity, from fear, as also on beholding hideous sights. The remedy lies in quieting their minds. There are 3 classes of spirits: some are frolicsome, some are gluttonous, and some sensual. Until men attain the age of 70, these evil influences continue to torment them, and then fever becomes the only evil spirit that afflicts sentient beings. These evil spirits always avoid those who have subdued their senses, who are self-restrained, of cleanly habits, God-fearing, and free from laziness and contamination. I have thus described to thee, O king, the evil spirits that mold the destinies of men. Thou who art devoted to Mahesvara art never troubled by them. Footnotes. For 63:1 Devsenapti is the original. It may mean either the Patti, leader, of the Sena, forces, of Devas, or the Patti, husband, of Devasena. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 230. Markandeya continued, when Skanda had bestowed these powers, Svaha appeared to him and said, Thou art my natural son, I desire that thou shalt grant exquisite happiness to me. Skanda replied, "What sort of happiness dost thou wish to enjoy?" Svaha replied, "O mighty being, I am the favorite daughter of Deksha, by name Svaha, and from my youthful days I have been in love with Hudasana, the fire god, but that god, my son, does not understand my feelings. I desire to live forever with him as his wife." Skanda replied, "From this day, lady, all the oblations that men of virtuous character, who swerve not from the path of virtue, will offer to their gods or ancestors with incantation of purifying hymns by Brahmanas, shall always be offered through Agni, coupled with the name of Svaha, and thus, excellent lady, wilt thou always live associated with Agni, the god of fire." Markandeya continued, "Thus addressed and honored by Skanda, Svaha was greatly pleased, and associated with her husband Pavaka, the fire god, she honored him in return. Then Brahma, the lord of all creatures, said to Mahasena, "Do thou go and visit thy father Mahadeva, the conqueror of Tripura." Rudra, coalescing with Agni, the fire god, and Uma with Svaha have combined to make the invincible for the well-being of all creatures. And the semen of the high-souled Rudra cast into the reproductive organ of Uma was thrown back upon this hill, and hence the twin Mujika and Minjika came into being. A portion of it fell into the blood sea, another portion into the rays of the sun, another upon the earth, and thus was it distributed in 5 portions. Learned men ought to remember that these thy various and fierce-looking followers living on the flesh of animals were produced from the semen. Be it so. So saying, the high-souled Mahasena with fatherly love honored his father Mahesvara. Markandeya continued, "Men who are desirous of acquiring wealth should worship those 5 classes of spirits with the sunflower, and for alleviation of diseases also worship must be rendered to them. The twin Mujika and Minjika begotten by Rudra must always be respected by persons desiring the welfare of little children, and persons who desire to have children born to them must always worship those female spirits who live on human flesh and are produced in trees. Thus all Pisachas are said to be divided into innumerable classes. And now, O king, listen to the origin of the bells and standards of Skanda. Airavata, Indra's elephant, is known to have had 2 bells of the name of Vajyanti, and the keen-witted Sakra had them brought to him, and personally gave them to Guha. Visakha took one of those bells, and Skanda the other. The standards of both Kartikeya and Visakha were of a red color. That mighty god Mahasena was pleased with the toys that had been given to him by the gods. Surrounded by hosts of gods and Pisachas and seated on the golden mountain, he looked splendid in all the grandeur of prosperity. And that mountain covered with fine forests also looked grand in his companionship, just as the Mandara hill abounding with excellent caves shines with the rays of the sun. The white mountain was adorned with whole tracts of woodland covered with blossoming Santanaka flowers and with forests of Karavira, Parahata, Jana, and Asoka trees, as also with wild tracts overgrown with Kadamva trees, and it abounded with herds of celestial deer and flocks of celestial birds. And the rumbling of clouds serving the purpose of musical instruments sounded like the murmur of an agitated sea, and celestial Gandharvas and Apsaras began to dance. And there arose a great sound of joy from the merriment of all creatures. Thus the whole world with Indra himself seemed to have been transferred to the White Mountain. And all the people began to observe Skanda with satisfaction in their looks, and they did not at all feel tired of doing so. Markandeya continued, "When that adorable son of the fire god was anointed as leader of the celestial army, that grand and happy lord, Hara, Mahadeva, riding with Parvati in a chariot shining with sun-like refulgence, repaired to a place called Bhadravata. His excellent chariot was drawn by 1,000 lions and managed by Kala. They passed through blank space, and seemed as if they were about to devour the sky, and striking terror into the heart of all creatures in the mobile divisions of the worlds, those maned beasts flitted through the air, uttering fearful growls. And that lord of all animals, Mahadeva, seated in that chariot with Uma, looked like the sun with flames of lightning illuminating masses of clouds begirt with Indra's bow, rainbow. He was preceded by that adorable lord of riches riding on the backs of human beings with his attendant Guhyakas riding in his beautiful car Puspaka. And Sakra too riding on his elephant Airavata and accompanied by other gods brought up the rear of Mahadeva, the grantator of bones, marching in this way at the head of the celestial army. And the great Yaksha Amoga with his attendants the Jambhaka Yakshas and other Rakshasas decorated with garlands of flowers obtained a place in the right wing of his army, and many gods of wonderful fighting powers in company with the Vasus and the Rudras also marched with the right division of his army. And the terrible-looking Yama too in company with death marched with him, followed by hundreds of terrible diseases, and behind him was carried the terrible, sharp-pointed, well-decorated trident of Shiva, called Vijaya. And Varuna, the adorable lord of waters with his terrible pasa, and surrounded by numerous aquatic animals, marched slowly with the trident. And the trident Vijaya was followed by the Padisa of Rudra guarded by maces, balls, clubs, and other excellent weapons. And the Padisa, O king, was followed by the bright umbrella of Rudra and the Kamandalu served by the Maharshis, and on it progressed in the company of Bhrigu, and Jairas, and others. And behind all these rode Rudra in his white chariot, reassuring the gods with the exhibition of his powers. And rivers and lakes and seas, Apsaras, Rishis, celestials, Gandharvas and serpents, stars, planets, and the children of gods, as also many women, followed him in his train. These handsome-looking ladies proceeded scattering flowers all around, and the clouds marched, having made their obeisance to that god, Mahadeva, armed with the Pinaka bow. And some of them held a white umbrella over his head, and Agni, the fire god, and Vayu, the god of winds, busied themselves with 2 hairy fans, emblems of royalty. And, O king, he was followed by the glorious Indra accompanied by the Rajarshis, and singing the praise of that god with the emblem of the bull. And Gauri, Vidya, Gandhari, Kasini, and the lady called Maitri in company with Savitri, all proceeded in the train of Parvati, as also all the Vidyas, presiding deities of all branches of knowledge that were created by the learned. The Rakshasa spirit who delivers to different battalions the commands which are implicitly obeyed by Indra and other gods, advanced in front of the army as standard-bearer. And that foremost of Rakshasas, by name Pingala, the friend of Rudra, who is always busy in places where corpses are burnt, and who is agreeable to all people, marched with them merrily, at one time going ahead of the army, and falling behind again at another, his movements being uncertain. Virtuous actions are the offerings with which the god Rudra is worshipped by mortals. He who is also called Shiva, the omnipotent god, armed with the Pinaka bow, is Mahesvara. He is worshipped in various forms. The son of Kritika, the leader of the celestial army, respectful to Brahmanas, surrounded by the celestial forces, also followed that lord of the gods. And then Mahadeva said these weighty words to Mahasena, "Do thou carefully command the 7th Army Corps of the celestial forces." Skanda replied, "Very well, my lord. I shall command the 7th Army Corps. Now tell me quickly if there is anything else to be done." Rudra said, "Thou shalt always find me in the field of action. By looking up to me and by devotion to me shalt thou attain great welfare." Markandeya continued, "With these words Mahesvara received him in his embrace, and then dismissed him. And, O great king, after the dismissal of Skanda, prodigies of various kinds occurred to disturb the equanimity of the gods. The firmament with the stars was in a blaze, and the whole universe in a state of utter confusion. The earth quaked and gave forth a rumbling sound, and darkness overspread the whole world. Then observing this terrible catastrophe, Sankara with the estimable Uma, and the celestials with the great Maharshis, were much exercised in mind. And when they had fallen into this state of confusion, there appeared before them a fierce and mighty host armed with various weapons, and looking like a mass of clouds and rocks. Those terrible and countless beings, speaking different languages, directed their movements towards the point where Sankara and the celestials stood. They hurled into the ranks of the celestial army flights of arrows in all directions, masses of rock, maces, satagnis, prasas, and parigas. The celestial army was thrown into a state of confusion by a shower of these terrible weapons, and their ranks were seen to waver. The Danavas made a great havoc by cutting up their soldiers, horses, elephants, chariots, and arms. And the celestial troops then seemed as if they were about to turn their backs upon the enemy. And numbers of them fell, slain by the Asuras, like large trees in a forest burnt in a conflagration. Those dwellers of heaven fell with their heads separated from their bodies, and having none to lead them in that fearful battle, they were slaughtered by the enemy. And then the god Purandara, Indra, the slayer of Vala, observing that they were unsteady and hard-pressed by the Asuras, tried to rally them with this speech: "Do not be afraid, ye heroes, may success attend your efforts. Do ye all take up your arms, and resolve upon manly conduct, and ye will meet with no more misfortune, and defeat those wicked and terrible-looking Danavas. May ye be successful. Do ye fall upon the Danavas with me?" The dwellers of heaven were reassured on hearing this speech from Sakra, and under his leadership they again rushed against the Danavas. And then the 33 crores of gods and all the powerful Marutas and the Sathyas with the Vasus returned to the charge. And the arrows which they angrily discharged against the enemy drew a large quantity of blood from the bodies of the Daityas and of their horses and elephants. And those sharp arrows passing through their bodies fell upon the ground, looking like so many snakes falling from the sides of a hill. And, O king, the Daityas pierced by those arrows fell fast on all sides, looking like so many detached masses of clouds. Then the Danava host, struck with panic at that charge of the Celestials on the field of battle, wavered at that shower of various weapons. Then all the gods loudly gave vent to their joy, with arms ready to strike, and the celestial bands too struck up various airs. Thus took place that encounter, so fearful to both sides, for all the battlefield was covered with blood and strewn with the bodies of both gods and Asuras. But the gods were soon worsted all on a sudden, and the terrible Danavas again made a great havoc of the celestial army. Then the Asuras, drums struck up and their shrill bugles were sounded, and the Danava chiefs yelled their terrific war cry. Then a powerful Danava, taking a huge mass of rock in his hands, came out of that terrible Daitya army. He looked like the sun peering forth from against a mass of dark clouds. And, O king, the celestials, beholding that he was about to hurl that mass of rock at them, fled in confusion. But they were pursued by Mahisha, who hurled that hillock at them. And, O Lord of the world, by the falling of that mass of rock, 10,000 warriors of the celestial army were crushed to the ground and breathed their last. And this act of Mahisha struck terror into the hearts of the gods, and with his attendant Danavas he fell upon them like a lion attacking a herd of deer. And when Indra and the other celestials observed that Mahisha was advancing to the charge, they fled, leaving behind their arms and colors. And Mahisha was greatly enraged at this, and he quickly advanced towards the chariot of Rudra, and reaching near, he seized its pole with his hands. And when Mahisha in a fit of rage had thus seized the chariot of Rudra, all the earth began to groan and the great rishis lost their senses. And Daityas of huge proportions, looking like dark clouds, were boisterous with joy, thinking that victory was assured to them. And although that adorable god, Rudra, was in that plight, yet he did not think it worth while to kill Mahisha in battle. He remembered that Skanda would deal the death blow to that evil-minded Asura. And the fiery Mahisha, contemplating with satisfaction the prize, the chariot of Rudra, which he had secured, sounded his war cry, to the great alarm of the gods and the joy of the Daityas. And when the gods were in that fearful predicament, the mighty Mahasena, burning with anger, and looking grand like the sun, advanced to their rescue. And that lordly being was clad in blazing red and decked with a wreath of red flowers. And cased in armor of gold he rode in a gold-colored chariot bright as the sun and drawn by chestnut horses. And at his sight the army of the Daityas was suddenly dispirited on the field of battle. And, O great king, the mighty Mahasena discharged a bright sakti for the destruction of Mahisha. That missile cut off the head of Mahisha, and he fell upon the ground and died. And his head, massive as a hillock, falling on the ground, barred the entrance to the country of the northern Kurus, extending in length for 16 yojanas, though at present the people of that country pass easily by that gate. It was observed both by the gods and the Danavas that Skanda hurled his sakti again and again on the field of battle, and that it returned to his hands, after killing thousands of the enemy's forces. And the terrible Danavas fell in large numbers by the arrows of the wise Mahasena. And then a panic seized them, and the followers of Skanda began to slay and eat them up by thousands and drink their blood. And they joyously exterminated the Danavas in no time, just as the sun destroys darkness, or as fire destroys a forest, or as the winds drive away the clouds. And in this manner the famous Skanda defeated all his enemies. And the gods came to congratulate him, and he, in turn, paid his respects to Mahesvara. And that son of Kritika looked grand like the sun in all the glory of his effulgence. And when the enemy was completely defeated by Skanda, and when Mahesvara left the battlefield, Purandara embraced Mahasena and said to him, "This Mahisha, who was made invincible by the favor of Brahma, hath been killed by thee. O best of warriors, the gods were like grass to him. O strong-limbed hero, thou hast removed the thorn of the celestials. Thou hast killed in battle hundreds of Danavas equal in valor to Mahisha, who were all hostile to us, and who used to harass us before. And thy followers too have devoured them by hundreds. Thou art, O mighty being, invincible in battle like Uma's lord, and this victory shall be celebrated as thy first achievement, and thy fame shall be undying in the three worlds. And, O strong-armed god, all the gods will yield their allegiance to thee." Having spoken thus to Mahasena, the husband of Sachi left the place accompanied by the gods, and with the permission of the adorable three-eyed god, Shiva. And Rudra returned to Bhadravata, and the celestials too returned to their respective abodes. And Rudra spoke, addressing the gods, "Ye must render allegiance to Skanda just as ye do unto me." And that son of the fire god, having killed the Danavas, hath conquered the three worlds in one day, and he hath been worshipped by the great rishis. The Brahmana who with due attention readeth this story of the birth of Skanda attaineth to great prosperity in this world and the companionship of Skanda hereafter. Yudhishthira said, "O good and adorable Brahmana, I wish to know the different names of that high-souled being, by which he is celebrated throughout the three worlds." Vaisampayana continued, thus addressed by the Pandava in that assembly of rishis, the worshipful Markandeya of high ascetic merit replied, "Agneya, son of Agni, Skanda, cast-off, Diptakirti, of blazing fame, Annamaya, always hail, Mayurakitu, peacock-bannered, Dharmatman, the virtuous-souled, Bhutesa, the lord of all creatures, Mahishardana, the slayer of Mahisha, Kamajith, the subjugator of desires, Kamata, the fulfiller of desires, Kanta, the handsome, Satuvak, the truthful in speech, Bhuvaneswara, the lord of the universe, Sisu, the child, Saira, the quick, Suchi, the pure, Chanda, the fiery, Diptavarna, the bright-complexioned, Subhanana, of beautiful face, Amoga, incapable of being baffled, Anaga, the sinless, Rudra, the terrible, Priya, the favorite, Chandranana, of face like the moon, Diptasasti, the wielder of the blazing lance, Prasantatman, of tranquil soul, Bhadrakrit, the doer of good, Kutamahana, the chamber of even the wicked, Shastipriya, true favorite of Shasti, Pavitra, the holy, Matravatsala, the reverencer of his mother, Kanyabartri, the protector of virgins, Vibhakta, diffused over the universe, Swahya, the son of Svaha, Rivadasuta, the child of Revti, Prabhu, the Lord, Nita, the leader, Visakha, reared up by Visakha, Nagamiya, sprang from the Veda, Sudaskara, difficult of propitiation, Suvrata, of excellent vows, Lalita, the beautiful, Valakritanakapriya, fond of toys, Katrin, the ranger of skies, Brahmakaran, the chaste, Sura, the brave, Saravanadbhava, born in a forest of heath, Viswamitra Priya, the favorite of Viswamitra, Devasena Priya, the lover of Devasena, Vasudeva Priya, the beloved of Vasudeva, and Priyakrit, the doer of agreeable things. These are the divine names of Kartikeya. Whoever repeateth them undoubtedly secureth fame, wealth, and salvation. Markandeya continued, O valiant scion of Kuru's race, I shall now with due devotion pray to that unrivaled, mighty, six-faced, and valiant Guha who is worshipped by gods and rishis, enumerating his other titles of distinction. Do thou listen to them. Thou art devoted to Brahma, begotten of Brahma, and versed in the mysteries of Brahma. Thou art called Brahmasaya, and thou art the foremost of those who are possessed of Brahma. Thou art fond of Brahma, thou art austere like the Brahmanas, and art versed in the great mystery of Brahma and the leader of the Brahmanas. Thou art Svaha, thou art Svadha, and thou art the holiest of the holy, and art invoked in hymns and celebrated as the six-flamed fire. Thou art the year, thou art the 6 seasons, thou art the months, the lunar, half-months, the solar, declinations, and the cardinal points of space. Thou art lotus-eyed. Thou art possessed of a lily-like face. Thou hast 1,000 faces and 1,000 arms. Thou art the ruler of the universe, thou art the great oblation, and thou art the animating spirit of all the gods and the Asuras. Thou art the great leader of armies. Thou art Prakanda, furious, thou art the Lord, and thou art the great master and the conqueror of thine enemies. Thou art Sahasrabhu, multiform, Sahasratusti, 1,000 times content, Sahasrabhuk, devourer of everything, and Sahasrapad, of 1,000 legs, and thou art the earth itself. Thou art possessed of infinite forms, and 1,000 heads, and great strength. According to thine own inclinations thou hast appeared as the son of Ganga, Svaha, Mahi, or Kritika. O six-faced God, thou dost play with the cock and assume different forms according to thy will. Thou art Diksha. Soma, the Maryuta, Dharma, Vayu, the prince of mountains, and Indra, for all time. Thou art mighty, the most eternal of all eternal things, and the Lord of all lords. Thou art the progenitor of truth, the destroyer of Thethi's progeny, Asuras, and the great conqueror of the enemies of the celestials. Thou art the personation of virtue, and being thyself vast and minute, thou art acquainted with the highest and lowest points of virtuous acts, and the mysteries of Brahma. O foremost of all gods and high-souled Lord of the universe, this whole creation is overspread with thy energy. I have thus prayed to thee according to the best of my power. I salute thee who art possessed of 12 eyes and many hands. Thy remaining attributes transcend my powers of comprehension. The Brahmana who with due attention readeth this story of the birth of Skanda, or relateth it unto Brahmanas, or hears it narrated by regenerate men, attaineth to wealth, long life, fame, children, as also victory, prosperity and contentment, and the companionship of Skanda. Footnotes. 467:1 a kind of missile. 467:2 another kind of weapon. Draupadi Satyabhama Samveda. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 231. Vaisampayana said, after those Brahmanas and the illustrious sons of Pandu had taken their seats, Draupadi and Satyabhama entered the hermitage. And with hearts full of joy the two ladies laughed merrily and seated themselves at their ease. And, O king, those ladies, who always spake sweetly to each other, having met after a long time, began to talk upon various delightful topics arising out of the stories of the Kurus and the Yadus. And the slender-waisted Satyabhama, the favorite wife of Krishna and the daughter of Satyajit, then asked Draupadi in private, saying, By what behavior is it, O daughter of Drupada, that thou art able to rule the sons of Pandu, those heroes endued with strength and beauty and like unto the Lokapalas themselves? Beautiful lady, how is it that they are so obedient to thee, and are never angry with thee? Without doubt the sons of Pandu, O thou of lovely features, are ever submissive to thee and watchful to do thy bidding. Tell me, O lady, the reason of this. Is it practice of vows, or asceticism, or incantation or drug at the time of the bath and season, or the efficacy of science, or the influence of youthful appearance, or the recitation of particular formulae, or homa, or collyrium and other medicaments? Tell me now, O princess of Panchala, of that blessed and auspicious thing by which, O Krishna, Krishna may ever be obedient to me. When the celebrated Satyabhama, having said this, ceased, the chaste and blessed daughter of Drupada answered her, saying, Thou askest me, O Satyabhama, of the practices of women that are wicked. How can I answer thee, O lady, about the cause that is pursued by wicked females? It doth not become thee, lady, to pursue the questions, or doubt me, after this, for thou art endued with intelligence and art the favorite wife of Krishna. When the husband learns that his wife is addicted to incantations and drugs, from that hour he beginneth to dread her like a serpent ensconced in his sleeping chamber. And can a man that is troubled with fear have peace, and how can one that hath no peace have happiness? A husband can never be made obedient by his wife's incantations. We hear of painful diseases being transmitted by enemies. Indeed, they that desire to slay others send poison in the shape of customary gifts, so that the man that taketh the powders so sent, by tongue or skin, is, without doubt, speedily deprived of life. Women have sometimes caused dropsy and leprosy, decrepitude and impotence and idiocy and blindness and deafness in men. These wicked women, ever treading in the path of sin, do sometimes, by these means, injure their husbands. But the wife should never do the least injury to her lord. Hear now, O illustrious lady, of the behavior I adopt towards the high-souled sons of Pandu. Keeping aside vanity, and controlling desire and wrath, I always serve with devotion the sons of Pandu with their wives. Restraining jealousy, with deep devotion of heart, without a sense of degradation at the services I perform, I wait upon my husbands. Ever fearing to utter what is evil or false, or to look or sit or walk with impropriety, or cast glances indicative of the feelings of the heart, do I serve the sons of Pritha, those mighty warriors blazing like the sun or fire, and handsome as the moon, those endued with fierce energy and prowess, and capable of slaying their foes by a glance of the eye. Celestial, or man, or Gandharv, young or decked with ornaments, wealthy or comely of person, none else my heart liketh. I never bathe or eat or sleep till he that is my husband hath bathed or eaten or slept, till, in fact, our attendants have bathed, eaten, or slept. Whether returning from the field, the forest, or the town, hastily rising up, I always salute my husband with water and a seat. I always keep the house and all household articles and the food that is to be taken well ordered and clean. Carefully do I keep the rice, and serve the food at the proper time. I never indulge in angry and fretful speech, and never imitate women that are wicked. Keeping idleness at distance, I always do what is agreeable. I never laugh except at a jest, and never stay for any length of time at the house gate. I never stay long in places for answering calls of nature, nor in pleasure gardens attached to the house. I always refrain from laughing loudly and indulging in high passion, and from everything that may give offense. Indeed, O Satyabhama, I always am engaged in waiting upon my lords. A separation from my lords is never agreeable to me. When my husband leaveth home for the sake of any relative, then renouncing flowers and fragrant paste of every kind, I begin to undergo penances. Whatever my husband drinketh not, whatever my husband eateth not, whatever my husband enjoyeth not, I ever renounce. O beautiful lady, decked in ornaments and ever controlled by the instruction imparted to me, I always devotedly seek the good of my lord. Those duties that my mother-in-law had told me of in respect of relatives, as also the duties of almsgiving, of offering worship to the gods, of oblations to the diseased, of boiling food in pots on auspicious days for offer to ancestors and guests of reverence and service to those that deserve our regards, and all else that is known to me, I always discharge day and night, without idleness of any kind. Having with my whole heart recourse to humility and approved rules, I serve my meek and truthful lords, ever observant of virtue, regarding them as poisonous snakes capable of being excited at a trifle. I think that to be eternal virtue for women which is based upon a regard for the husband. The husband is the wife's God, and he is her refuge. Indeed, there is no other refuge for her. How can, then, the wife do the least injury to her lord? I never, in sleeping or eating or adorning any person, act against the wishes of my lord, and always guided by my husbands, I never speak ill of my mother-in-law. O blessed lady, my husbands have become obedient to me in consequence of my diligence, my alacrity, and the humility with which I serve superiors. Personally do I wait every day with food and drink and clothes upon the revered and truthful Kunti, that mother of heroes. Never do I show any preference for myself over her in matters of food and attire, and never do I reprove in words that princess equal unto the earth herself in forgiveness. Formerly, 8,000 Brahmanas were daily fed in the palace of Yudhishthira from off plates of gold. And 80,000 Brahmanas also of the Snataka sect leading domestic lives were entertained by Yudhishthira with 30 serving maids assigned to each. Besides these, 10,000 yadis with the vital seed drawn up had their pure food carried unto them in plates of gold. All these Brahmanas that were the utterers of the Veda, I used to worship duly with food, drink, and raiment taken from stores only after a portion thereof had been dedicated to the Viswadeva. The illustrious son of Kunti had 100,000 well-dressed serving maids with bracelets on arms and golden ornaments on necks, and decked with costly garlands and wreaths and gold in profusion, and sprinkled with sandal paste. And adorned with jewels and gold, they were all skilled in singing and dancing. O lady, I knew the names and features of all those girls, as also what they are and what they were, and what they did not. Kunti's son of great intelligence had also 100,000 maidservants who daily used to feed guests, with plates of gold in their hands. And while Yudhishthira lived in Indraprastha, 100,000 horses and 100,000 elephants used to follow in his train. These were the possessions of Yudhishthira while he ruled the earth. It was I, however, O lady, who regulated their number and framed the rules to be observed in respect of them, and it was I who had to listen to all complaints about them. Indeed, I knew everything about what the maidservants of the palace and other classes of attendants, even the cowherds and the shepherds of the royal establishment, did or did not. O blessed and illustrious lady, it was I alone amongst the Pandavas who knew the income and expenditure of the king and what their whole wealth was. And those bulls among the Bharatas, throwing upon me the burden of looking after all those that were to be fed by them, would, O thou of handsome face, pay their court to me. And this load, so heavy and incapable of being borne by persons of evil heart, I used to bear day and night, sacrificing my ease, and all the while affectionately devoted to them. And while my husbands were engaged in the pursuit of virtue, I only supervised their treasury inexhaustible like the ever-filled receptacle of Varuna. Day and night bearing hunger and thirst, I used to serve the Kuru princes, so that my nights and days were equal to me. I used to wake up first and go to bed last. This, O Satyabhama, hath ever been my charm for making my husbands obedient to me. This great art hath ever been known to me for making my husbands obedient to me. Never have I practiced the charms of wicked women, nor do I ever wish to practice them. Vaisampayana continued, hearing those words of virtuous import uttered by Krishna, Satyabhama, having first reverenced the virtuous princess of Panchala, answered saying, O princess of Panchala, I have been guilty, O daughter of Yajnasena, forgive me. Among friends, conversations and jest arise naturally, and without premeditation. Footnotes 474:1 The word in the text is agrahara, which, as Nilkantha explains, means here that which is first taken from a heap after the dedication of a portion to the Viswadevas. What Draupadi means to say is that she always took care to feed those brahmanas with food first taken from the stores, without, in fact, having taken anything there from the use of anybody else. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 232. Draupadi said, I shall now indicate to thee, for attracting the heart of thy husbands a way that is free from deceit. By adopting it duly, dear friend, thou wilt be able to draw away thy lord from other females. In all the worlds, including that of the celestials, there is no god equal, O Satyabhama, unto the husband. When he is gratified with thee, thou mayst have, from thy husband, every object of desire. When he is angry, all these may be lost. It is from her husband that the wife obtaineth offspring and various articles of enjoyment. It is from thy husband that thou mayst have handsome beds and seats, and robes and garlands, and perfumes, and great fame and heaven itself hereafter. One cannot obtain happiness here by means that are easy. Indeed, the woman that is chaste obtains weal with woe. Always adore Krishna, therefore, with friendship and love physical sufferings. And do thou also act in a way, by offering handsome seats and excellent garlands and various perfumes and prompt service, that he may be devoted to thee, thinking, I am truly loved by her. Hearing the voice of thy Lord at the gate, rise thou up from thy seat and stay in readiness within the room. And as soon as thou sayest him into thy chamber, worship him by promptly offering him a seat and water to wash his feet. And even when he commands a maidservant to do anything, get thou up and do it thyself. Let Krishna understand this temper of thy mind, and know that thou adorest him with all thy heart. And, O Satyabhama, whatever thy Lord speaketh before thee, do not blab of it even if it may not deserve concealment, for if any of thy co-wives were to speak of it unto Vasudeva, he might be irritated with thee. Feed thou by every means in thy power those that are dear and devoted to thy Lord, and always seek his good. Thou shouldst, however, always keep thyself aloof from those that are hostile to and against thy Lord and seek to do him injury, as also from those that are addicted to deceit. Foregoing all excitement and carelessness in the presence of men, conceal thy inclinations by observing silence, and thou shouldst not stay or converse in private even with thy sons, Pradyumna and Samva. Thou shouldst form attachments with only such females as are highborn and sinless and devoted to their lords, and thou shouldst always shun women that are wrathful, addicted to drinks, gluttonous, thievish, wicked, and fickle. Behavior such as this is reputable and productive of prosperity, and while it is capable of neutralizing hostility, it also leadeth to heaven. Therefore, worship thou thy husband, decking thyself in costly garlands and ornaments, and smearing thyself with unguents and excellent perfumes. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 233. Vyasa said, Then Kesava, the slayer of Madhu, also called Janardana, having conversed on various agreeable themes with the illustrious sons of Pandu and with those Brahmanas that were headed by Markandeya, and having bid them farewell, mounted his car and called for Satyabhama. And Satyabhama then, having embraced the daughter of Drupada, addressed her in these cordial words expressive of her feelings towards her, O Krishna, let there be no anxiety, no grief, for thee. Thou hast no cause to pass thy nights in sleeplessness, for thou wilt surely obtain back the earth subjugated by thy husbands, who are all equal unto the gods. O thou of black eyes, women endued with such disposition and possessed of such auspicious marks, can never suffer misfortune long. It hath been heard by me that thou shalt, with thy husbands, certainly enjoy this earth peacefully and freed from all thorns. And, O daughter of Drupada, thou shalt certainly behold the earth ruled by Yudhishthira after the sons of Dhritarashtra have been slain and the deeds of their hostility avenged. Thou wilt soon behold those wives of the Kurus, who, deprived of sense by pride, laughed at thee while on thy way to exile, themselves reduced to a state of helplessness and despair. Know them all, O Krishna, that did thee any injury while thou wert afflicted, to have already gone to the abode of Yama. Thy brave sons, Pratavindya by Yudhishthira and Sudasoma by Bhima, and Shrutakarman by Arjuna, and Satanika by Nakula, and Shrudasena begot by Sadeva, are well and have become skilled in weapons. Like Abhimanyu they are all staying at Dwaravati, delighted with the place. And Subhadra also, cheerfully, and with her whole soul, looketh after them like thee, and like thee joyeth in them and deriveth much happiness from them. Indeed, she grieveth in their griefs and joyeth in their joys. And the mother of Pradyumna also loveth them with her whole soul. And Kesava with his sons Bhanu and others watcheth over them with a special affection. And my mother-in-law is ever attentive in feeding and clothing them. And the Andhakas and Vrishnis, including Rama and others, regard them with affection. And, O beautiful lady, their affection for thy sons is equal unto what they feel for Pradyumna. Having said these agreeable and truthful and cordial words, Satyabhama desired to go to Vasudeva's car. And the wife of Krishna then walked round the queen of the Pandavas. And having done so, the beautiful Satyabhama mounted the car of Krishna. And the chief of the Yadavas, comforting Draupadi with a smile and causing the Pandavas to return, set out for his own city, with swift horses, yoked unto his car. Ghoshayatra Parva. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 234. Janamejaya said, While those foremost of men the sons of Pritha were passing their days in the forest exposed to the inclemencies of the winter, the summer, the wind and the sun, what did they do, O Brahmana, after they had reached the lake in woods going by the name of Dwaita? Vyasa said, After the sons of Pandu had arrived at that lake, they chose a residence that was removed from the habitations of men. And they began to roam through delightful woods, and ever-charming mountains, and picturesque river valleys. And after they had taken up their residence there, many venerable ascetics endued with Vedic lore often came to see them. And those foremost of men always received those Veda-knowing rishis with great respect. And one day there came unto the Kaurava princes a certain Brahmana who was well known on earth for his powers of speech. And having conversed with the Pandavas for a while, he went away as pleased him to the court of the royal son of Vichitravirya. Received with respect by that chief of the Kurus, the old king, the Brahmana took his seat, and asked by the monarch he began to talk of the sons of Dharma, Pavna, Indra, and of the twins, all of whom having fallen into severe misery, had become emaciated and reduced owing to exposure to wind and sun. And that Brahmana also talked of Krishna, who was overwhelmed with suffering and who then had become perfectly helpless, although she had heroes for her lords. And hearing the words of that Brahmana, the royal son of Vichitravirya became afflicted with grief at the thought of those princes of royal lineage then swimming in a river of sorrow. His inmost soul afflicted with sorrow and trembling all over with sighs, he quieted himself with a great effort, remembering that everything had arisen from his own fault. And the monarch said, "Alas, how is it that Yudhishthira, who is the eldest of my sons, who is truthful and pious and virtuous in his behavior, who hath not a foe, who had formerly slept on beds made of soft ranker skins, sleepeth now on the bare ground? Alas, wakened formerly by Sudas and Magadhas and other singers with his praises, melodiously recited every morning, that prince of the Kuru race, equal unto Indra himself, is now waked from the bare ground towards the small hours of the night by a multitude of birds. How doth Vrkodara, reduced by exposure to wind and sun and filled with wrath, sleep, in the presence of the princess of Panchala, on the bare ground, unfit as he is to suffer such lot? Perhaps also the intelligent Arjuna, who is incapable of bearing pain, and who, though obedient to the will of Yudhishthira, yet feeleth himself to be pierced over all by the remembrance of his wrongs, sleepeth not in the night. Beholding the twins and Krishna and Yudhishthir and Bhima plunged in misery, Arjuna without doubt sigheth like a serpent of fierce energy and sleepeth not from wrath in the night. The twins also, who are even like a couple of blessed celestials in heaven sunk in woe though deserving of bliss, without doubt pass their nights in restless wakefulness restrained from avenging their wrongs by virtue and truth. The mighty son of the wind god, who is equal to the wind god himself in strength, without doubt sigheth and restraineth his wrath, being tied through his elder brother in the bonds of truth. Superior in battle to all warriors, he now lieth quiet on the ground, restrained by virtue and truth, and burning to slay my children, he bideth his time. The cruel words that Dussasana spoke after Yudhishthira had been deceitfully defeated at dice have sunk deep into Vrkodara's heart, and are consuming him, like a burning bundle of straw consuming a faggot of dry wood. The son of Dharma never acteth sinfully, Dhananjaya also always obeyeth him, but Bhima's wrath, in consequence of a life of exile, is increasing like a conflagration assisted by the wind. That hero, burning with rage such as that, squeezeth his hands and breatheth hot and fierce sighs, as if consuming there with my sons and grandsons. The wielder of the Gandiva and Vrkodara, when angry, are like Yama and Kala themselves, scattering their shafts, which are like unto thunderbolts, they exterminate in battle the ranks of the enemy. Alas, Duryodhana, and Sakuni, and the Suta's son, and Dussasana also of wicked soul, and robbing the Pandavas of their kingdom by means of dice, seem to behold the honey alone without marking the terrible ruin. A man having acted rightly or wrongly, expecteth the fruit of those acts. The fruit, however, confounding him, paralyses him fully. How can man, thereof, have salvation? If the soil is properly tilled, and the seed sown therein, and if the God of rain showereth in season, still the crop may not grow. This is what we often hear. Indeed, how could this saying be true unless, as I think, it be that everything here is dependent on destiny? The gambler Sakuni hath behaved deceitfully towards the son of Pandu, who ever acteth honestly. From affection for my wicked sons, I also have acted similarly. Alas, it is owing to this that the hour of destruction hath come for the Kurus. Oh, perhaps, what is inevitable must happen. The wind, impelled or not, will move. The woman that conceives will bring forth. Darkness will be dispelled at dawn, and day disappear at evening. Whatever may be earned by us or others, whether people spend it or not, when the time cometh, those possessions of ours do bring on misery. Why then do people become so anxious about earning wealth? If, indeed, what is acquired is the result of fate, then should it be protected so that it may not be divided, nor lost little by little, nor permitted to flow out at once, for if unprotected, it may break into 100 fragments. But whatever the character of our possessions, our acts in the world are never lost. Behold what the energy of Arjuna is, who went into the abode of Indra from the woods. Having mastered the 4 kinds of celestial weapons, he hath come back into this world. What man is there who, having gone to heaven in his human form, wisheth to come back? This would never have been but because he seeth innumerable Kurus to be at the point of death, afflicted by time. The bowman is Arjuna, capable of wielding the bow with his left hand as well. The bow he wieldeth is the Gandiva of fierce impetus. He hath, besides, those celestial weapons of his. Who is there that would bear the energy of these three? Hearing these words of the monarch, the son of Suvala, going unto Duryodhana, who was then sitting with Kama, told them everything in private. And Duryodhana, though possessed of little sense, was filled with grief at what he heard. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 235. Vyasa said, hearing those words of Dhritarashtra, Sakuni, when the opportunity presented itself, aided by Kama, spoke unto Duryodhana these words, having exiled the heroic Pandavas by thy own prowess, O Bharata, rule thou this earth without a rival like the slayer of Samvara ruling the heaven. O monarch, the kings of the east, the south, the west, and the north have all been made tributary to thee. O Lord of earth, that blazing prosperity which had before paid her court to the sons of Pandu, hath now been acquired by thee along with thy brothers. That blazing prosperity, O king, which we not many days ago saw with heavy hearts in Yudhishthira at Indraprastha, is today seen by us to be owned by thee, she having, O mighty armed monarch, been snatched by thee from the royal Yudhishthira by force of intellect alone. O slayer of hostile heroes, all the kings of the earth, now living in subjection to thee, await thy commands, as they did before under Yudhishthira, awaiting his. O monarch, the goddess earth, with her boundless extent with girth of seas, with her mountains and forests, and towns and cities and mines, and decked with woodlands and hills, is now thine. Adored by the Brahmanas and worshipped by the kings, thou blazest forth, O king, in consequence of thy prowess, like the sun among the gods in heaven. Surrounded by the Kurus, O king, like Yama by the Rudra, or Vasva by the Maruts, thou shinest, O monarch, like the moon among the stars. Let us, therefore, O king, go and look at the sons of Pandu, them who are now divested of prosperity, them who never obeyed commands, them who never owed subjection. It hath been heard by us, O monarch, that the Pandavas are now living on the banks of the lake called Dwaitavana, with a multitude of Brahmanas, having the wilderness for their home. Go thither, O king, in all thy prosperity, scorching the son of Pandu with a sight of thy glory, like the sun scorching everything with his hot rays. Thyself a sovereign, and they divested of sovereignty, thyself in prosperity, and they divested of it, thyself possessing affluence, and they in poverty. Behold now, O king, the sons of Pandu. Let the sons of Pandu behold thee like Yayati, the son of Nahusha, accompanied by a large train of followers, and enjoying bliss that is great. O king, that blazing prosperity which is seen by both one's friends and foes, is regarded as well bestowed. What happiness can be more complete than that which he enjoyeth, who while himself in prosperity, looketh upon his foes in adversity, like a person on the hilltop looking down upon another crawling on the earth? O tiger among kings, the happiness that one derives from beholding his foes in grief is greater than what one may derive from the acquisition of offering or wealth or kingdom. What happiness will not be his who, himself in affluence, will cast his eyes on the Nanjaya attired in barks and deerskins? Let thy wife dressed in costly robes look at the woeful Krishna clad in barks and deerskins, and enhance the latter's grief. Let the daughter of Drupada reproach herself and her life, divested as she is of wealth, for the sorrow that she will feel upon beholding thy wife decked in ornaments will be far greater than what she had felt in the midst of the assembly, when Dasasana had dragged her there. Vyasa continued, having thus spoken unto the king, Karna and Sakuni both remained silent, O Janamejaya, after their discourse was over. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 236. Vyasa said, having heard these words of Karna, King Duryodhana became highly pleased. Soon after, however, the prince became melancholy and addressing the speaker said, What thou tellest me, O Karna, is always before my mind. I shall not, however, obtain permission to repair to the place where the Pandavas are residing. King Dhritarashtra is always grieving for those heroes. Indeed, the king regarded the sons of Pandu to have become more powerful than before in consequence of their ascetic austerities. Or, if the king understands our motives, he will never, having regard to the future, grant us permission, for, O thou of great effulgence, we can have no other business in the woods of Dwaitavana than the destruction of the Pandavas in exile. Thou knowest the words that Kshatri spoke to me to thyself, and to the son of Suvala, at the time of the match at dice. Reflecting upon all those words, as also upon all those lamentations that he and others indulged in, I cannot make up my mind as to whether I should or should not go. I shall certainly be highly pleased if I cast my eyes on Bhima and Phalguna passing their days in pain with Krishna in the woods. The joy that I may feel in obtaining the sovereignty of the entire earth is nothing to that which will be mine upon beholding the sons of Pandu attired in barks of trees and deerskins. What joy can be greater, O Karna, that will be mine upon beholding the daughter of Drupada dressed in red rags in the woods? If King Yudhishthira and Bhima, the sons of Pandu, behold me graced with great affluence, then only shall I have attained the great end of my life. I do not, however, see the means by which I may repair to those woods, by which, in fact, I may obtain the king's permission to go thither. Contrive thou, therefore, some skillful plan, with Suvala's son and Dasasana, by which we may go to those woods. I also, making up my mind today as to whether I should go or not, approach the presence of the king tomorrow. And when I shall be sitting with Bhishma, that best of the Kurus, thou wilt, with Sakuni, propose the pretext which thou mayst have contrived. Hearing then the words of Bhishma and of the king on the subject of our journey, I will settle everything, beseeching our grandfather. Saying, so be it, they then all went away to their respective quarters. And as soon as the night had passed away, Karna came to the king. And coming to him, Karna smilingly spoke unto Duryodhana, saying, a plan hath been contrived by me. Listen to it, O Lord of men. Our herds are now waiting in the woods of Dwaitavana in expectation of thee. Without doubt, we may all go there under the pretext of supervising our cattle stations, for, O monarch, it is proper that kings should frequently repair to their cattle stations. If this be the motive put forth, thy father, O prince, will certainly grant thee permission. And while Duryodhana and Karna were thus conversing laughingly, Sakuni addressed them and said, this plan, free from difficulties, was what I also saw for going thither. The king will certainly grant us permission, or even send us thither of his own accord. Our herds are now all waiting in the woods of Dwaitavana expecting thee. Without doubt, we may all go there under the pretext of supervising our cattle stations. They then all three laughed together, and gave their hands unto one another. And having arrived at that conclusion, they went to see the chief of Kurus. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 237. Vaisampayana said, they then all saw King Dhritarashtra, O Janamejaya, and having seen him, inquired after his welfare, and were, in return, asked about their welfare. Then a cowherd named Samanga, who had been instructed beforehand by them, approaching the king, spoke unto him of the cattle. Then the son of Radha and Sakuni, O king, addressing Dhritarashtra, that foremost of monarchs, said, O Kaurava, our cattle stations are now in a delightful place. The time for their tale is also for marking the calves hath come. And, O monarch, this also is an excellent season for thy son to go a-hunting. It behoveth thee, therefore, to grant permission to Duryodhana to go thither. Dhritarashtra replied, the chase of the deer, as also the examination of cattle, is very proper, O child. I think, indeed, that the herdsmen are not to be trusted. But we have heard that those tigers among men, the Pandavas, are now staying in the vicinity of those cattle stations. I think, therefore, ye should not go thither yourselves. Defeated by deceitful means, they are now living in the deep forest in great suffering. O Radheya, they are mighty warriors and naturally able, they are now devoted to ascetic austerities. King Yudhishthira will not suffer his wrath to be awakened, but Bhimasena is naturally passionate. The daughter of Yajnasena is energy's self. Full of pride and folly, ye are certain to give offense. Endued with ascetic merit, she will certainly consume you, or perhaps, those heroes, armed with swords and weapons. Nor, if from force of numbers, ye seek to injure them in any respect, that will be a highly improper act, although, as I think, ye will never be able to succeed. The mighty armed Dhananjaya hath returned thence to the forest. While unaccomplished in arms, Vivatsu had subjugated the whole earth before. A mighty warrior as he is, and accomplished in arms now, will he not be able to slay you all? Or, if in obedience to my words, ye behave carefully having repaired thither, ye will not be able to live happily there in consequence of the anxiety ye will feel owing to a state of continued trustlessness. Or, some soldier of yours may do some injury to Yudhishthira, and that unpremeditated act will be ascribed to your fault. Therefore, let some faithful men proceed there for the work of tale. I do not think it is proper for thee, Bharata, to go thither thyself. Sakuni said, the eldest of the sons of Pandu is cognizant of morality. He pledged in the midst of the assembly, O Bharata, that he would live for 12 years in the forest. The other sons of Pandu are all virtuous and obedient to Yudhishthira. And Yudhishthira himself, the son of Kunti, will never be angry with us. Indeed, we desire very much to go on a hunting expedition, and will avail of that opportunity for supervising the tail of our cattle. We have no mind to see the sons of Pandu. We will not go to that spot where the Pandavas have taken up their residence, and consequently no exhibition of misconduct can possibly arise on our part. Vyasa continued, thus addressed by Sakuni, that Lord of Men, Dhritarashtra, granted permission, but not very willingly, to Duryodhana and his counselors to go to the place. And permitted by the monarch, the Bharata prince born of Gandhari started, accompanied by Karna and surrounded by a large host. And he was also accompanied by Desasana and Suvala's son of great intelligence, and by many other brothers of his, and by ladies in thousands. And as the mighty armed prince started for beholding the lake that was known by the name of Dwaitavana, the citizens of Hastina, also accompanied by their wives, began to follow him to that forest. 8,000 cars, 30,000 elephants, 9,000 horses, and many thousands of foot soldiers, and shops and pavilions and traders, bards and men trained in the chase by hundreds and thousands followed the prince. And as the king started, followed by this large concourse of people, the uproar that was caused there resembled, O king, the deep tumult of the raging winds in the rainy season. And reaching the lake Dwaitavana with all his followers and vehicles, King Duryodhana took up his quarters at the distance of 4 miles from it. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 238. Vyasa said, King Duryodhana then moving from forest to forest, at last approached the cattle stations, and encamped his troops. And his attendants, selecting a well-known and delightful spot that abounded in water and trees, and that possessed every convenience, constructed an abode for him. And near enough to the royal residence they also erected separate abodes for Kama and Sakuni and the brothers of the king. And the king beheld his cattle by hundreds and thousands, and examining their limbs and marks supervised their tail. And he caused the calves to be marked and took note of those that required to be tamed. And he also counted those kine whose calves had not yet been weaned. And completing the task of tail by marking and counting every calf that was 3 years old, the Kuru prince, surrounded by the cowherds, began to sport and wander cheerfully. And the citizens also and the soldiers by thousands began to sport, as best pleased them, in those woods, like the celestials. And the herdsmen, well skilled in singing and dancing and instrumental music, and virgins decked in ornaments, began to minister to the pleasures of Dhritarashtra's son. And the king, surrounded by the ladies of the royal household, began cheerfully to distribute wealth and food and drinks of various kinds amongst those that sought to please him, according to their desires. And the king, attended by all his followers, began also to slay hyenas and buffaloes and deer and gyals and bears and boars all around. And the king, piercing by his shafts those animals by thousands in deep forest, caused the deer to be caught in the more delightful parts of the woods. Drinking milk and enjoying, O Bharata, various other delicious articles, and beholding, as he proceeded, many delightful forests and woods swarming with bees inebriated with floral honey and resounding with the notes of the peacock, the king at last reached the sacred lake of Dwaitavana. And the spot which the king reached swarmed with bees inebriated with floral honey, and echoed with the mellifluous notes of the blue-throated jay, and was shaded by saptakatas and panagas and vacuolas. And the king, graced with high prosperity, proceeded thither like the thunder-wielding chief of the celestials himself. And, O thou best of the Kuru race, King Yudhishthira the just, endued with high intelligence, was then, O monarch, residing in the vicinity of that lake at will and celebrating with his wedded wife, the daughter of Drupada, the diurnal sacrifice called Rajarshi, according to the ordinance sanctioned for the celestials and persons living in the wilderness. And, O monarch, having reached that spot, Duryodhana commanded his men by thousands, saying, "Let pleasure houses be constructed soon." Thus commanded, those doers of the king's behests replying to the Kuru chief with the words, "So be it," went towards the banks of the lake for constructing pleasure houses. And as the picked soldiers of Dhritarashtra's son, having reached the region of the lake, were about to enter the gates of the wood, a number of Gandharvas appeared and forbade them to enter. For, O monarch, the king of the Gandharvas, accompanied by his followers, had come thither beforehand, from the abode of Kuvara. And the king of the Gandharvas had also been accompanied by the several tribes of Apsaras, as also by the sons of the celestials, and intent upon sport, he had come to that place for merriment, and occupying it, had closed it against all comers. And the attendants of the Kuru king, finding the lake closed by the king of the Gandharvas, went back, O monarch, to where the royal Duryodhana was. And Duryodhana, having heard these words, dispatched a number of his warriors difficult of being subjugated in battle, commanding them to drive away the Gandharvas. And those warriors who formed the vanguard of the Kuru army, hearing these words of the king, went back to the lake of Dwaitavana, and addressing the Gandharvas, said, "The mighty king Duryodhana the son of Dhritarashtra is coming hither for sport. Stand ye aside, therefore." Thus addressed by them, O king, the Gandharvas laughed and replied unto those men in these harsh words, "Your wicked king Duryodhana must be destitute of sense. How else could he have thus commanded us that are dwellers of heaven, as if indeed we were his servants? Without forethought, ye also are doubtless on the point of death, for senseless idiots as ye are, ye have dared to bring us his message. Return ye soon to where that king of the Kurus is, or else go this very day to the abode of Yama." Thus addressed by the Gandharvas, the advanced guard of the king's army ran back to the place where the royal son of Dhritarashtra was. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 239. Vyasa said, "Those soldiers then, O king, all went back to Duryodhana and repeated to him every word that the Gandharvas had said. And, O Bharata, finding that his soldiers had been opposed by the Gandharvas, Dhritarashtra's son, endued with energy, was filled with rage. And the king addressed his soldiers, saying, "Punish these wretches who desire to oppose my will, even if they have come hither to sport, accompanied by all the celestials with him of 100 sacrifices." And hearing these words of Duryodhana, the sons and officers of Dhritarashtra, all endued with great strength, as also warriors by thousands, began to arm themselves for battle. And filling the 10 sides with loud leonine roars, and rushing at those Gandharvas that had been guarding the gates, they entered the forest. And as the Kuru soldiers entered the forest, other Gandharvas came up and forbade them to advance. And though gently forbidden by the Gandharvas to advance, the Kuru soldiers, without regarding them in the least, began to enter that mighty forest. And when those rangers of the sky found that the warriors of Dhritarashtra along with their king could not be stopped by words, they all went to their king Chitrasena and represented everything unto him. And when Chitrasena, the king of the Gandharvas, came to know all this, he became filled with rage, alluding to the Kuru, and commanded his followers, saying, "Punish these wretches of wicked behavior." And, O Bharata, when the Gandharvas were so commanded by Chitrasena, they rushed weapons in hand towards the Dhritarashtra ranks. And beholding the Gandharvas impetuously rushing towards them with upraised weapons, the Kuru warriors precipitously fled in all directions at the very sight of Duryodhana. And beholding the Kuru soldiers all flying from the field with their backs to the foe, the heroic Radheya alone fled not. And seeing the mighty host of the Gandharvas rushing towards him, Radheya checked them by a perfect shower of arrows. And the Suta's son, owing to his extreme lightness of hand, struck hundreds of Gandharvas with kshirapras and arrows and balas and various weapons made of bones and steel. And that mighty warrior, causing the heads of numerous Gandharvas to roll down within a short time, made the ranks of Chitrasena to yell in anguish. And although they were slaughtered in great numbers by Karna endued with great intelligence, yet the Gandharvas returned to the charge by hundreds and thousands. And in consequence of the swarms of Chitrasena's warriors rushing impetuously to the field, the earth itself became soon covered by the Gandharv host. Then King Duryodhana, and Sakuni, the son of Suvala, and Dusasana, and Vikarna, and other sons of Dhritarashtra, seated on cars the clatter of whose wheels resembled the roars of Garuda, returned to the charge, following the lead of Karna, and began to slaughter that host. And desirous of supporting Karna, these princes invested the Gandharva army with a large number of cars and a strong body of horses. Then the whole of the Gandharva host began to fight with the Kauravas. And the encounter that took place between the contending hosts was fierce in the extreme and might make one's hair stand on end. The Gandharvas, at last, afflicted with the shafts of the Kuru army, seemed to be exhausted. And the Kauravas, beholding the Gandharvas so afflicted, sent up a loud sound. And seeing the Gandharva host yielding to fear, the angry Chitrasena sprang from his seat, resolved to exterminate the Kuru army. And conversant with various modes of warfare, he waged on the fight, aided by his weapons of illusion. And the Kaurava warriors were then all deprived of their senses by the illusion of Chitrasena. And then, O Bharata, it seemed that every warrior of the Kuru army was fallen upon and surrounded by 10 Gandharvas. And attacked with great vigor, the Kuru host was greatly afflicted and struck with panic. O king, all of them that liked to live fled from the field. But while the entire Dhritarashtra host broke and fled, Karna, that offspring of the sun, stood there, O king, immovable as a hill. Indeed, Duryodhana and Karna and Sakuni, the son of Suvala, all fought with the Gandharvas, although every one of them was much wounded and mangled in the encounter. All the Gandharvas then, desirous of slaying Karna, rushed together by hundreds and thousands towards Karna. And those mighty warriors, desirous of slaying the Suta's son, surrounded him on all sides, with swords and battle-axes and spears. And some cut down the yoke of his car, and some his flagstaff, and some the shaft of his car, and some his horses, and some his charioteer. And some cut down his umbrella, and some the wooden fender round his car, and some the joints of his car. It was thus that many thousands of Gandharvas, together attacking his car, broke it into minute fragments. And while his car was thus attacked, Karna leaped therefrom with sword and shield in hand, and mounting on Vikarna's car, urged the steeds for saving himself. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 240. Vaisampayana said, after that great warrior Karna had been routed by the Gandharvas, the whole of the Kuru army, O monarch, fled from the field in the very sight of Dhritarashtra's son. And beholding all his troops flying from the field of battle with their back to the foe, King Duryodhana refused to fly. Seeing the mighty host of the Gandharvas rushing towards him, that repressor of foes poured down upon them a thick shower of arrows. The Gandharvas, however, without regarding that arrowy shower, and desirous also of slaying him, surrounded that car of his. And by means of their arrows, they cut off into fragments the yoke, the shaft, the fenders, the flagstaff, the threefold bamboo poles, and the principal turret of his car. And they also slew his charioteer and horses, hacking them to pieces. And when Duryodhana, deprived of his car, fell on the ground, the strong-armed Chitrasena rushed towards him and seized him in such a way that it seemed his life itself was taken. And after the Kuru king had been seized, the Gandharvas, surrounding Dusasana, who was seated on his car, also took him prisoner. And some Gandharvas seized Vivansati and Chitrasena, and some Vinda and Anyuvinda, while others seized all the ladies of royal household. And the warriors of Duryodhana, who were routed by the Gandharvas, joining those who had fled first, approached the Pandavas, who were living in the vicinity. And after Duryodhana had been made captive, the vehicles, the shops, the pavilions, the carriages, and the draft animals, all were made over to the Pandavas for protection. And those soldiers said, the mighty armed son of Dhritarashtra, possessed of great strength and handsome mien, is being taken away captive by the Gandharvas. Ye sons of Pritha, follow them. Dusasana, Durvashasa, Dharmaka, and Dujaya are all being led away as captives in chains by the Gandharvas, as also all the ladies of the royal household. Crying thus, the followers of Duryodhana, afflicted with grief and melancholy, approached Yudhishthira, desirous of effecting the release of the king. Bhima then answered those old attendants of Duryodhana, who, afflicted with grief and melancholy, were thus soliciting the aid of Yudhishthira, saying, "What we should have done with great efforts, arraying ourselves in line of battle, supported by horses and elephants hath, indeed, been done by the Gandharvas. They that come hither for other purposes have been overtaken by consequences they had not foreseen. Indeed, this is the result of the evil counsels of a king who is fond of deceitful play. It hath been heard by us that the foe of a person who is powerless is overthrown by others. The Gandharvas have, in an extraordinary way, illustrated before our eyes the truth of this saying. It seems that there is still fortunately some person in the world who is desirous of doing us good, who hath, indeed, taken upon his own shoulders our pleasant load, although we are sitting idly. The rich had come hither to cast his eyes on us, himself in prosperity, while ourselves are sunk in adversity and emaciated by ascetic austerities, and are exposed to wind, cold, and heat. They that imitate the behavior of that sinful and wretched Kaurava are now beholding his disgrace. He that had instructed Duryodhana to do this had certainly acted sinfully. That the sons of Kunti are not wicked and sinful, I tell it before you all." And while Bhima, the son of Kunti, was speaking thus in a voice of sarcasm, King Yudhishthira told him, "This is not time for cruel words." Present you by HinduMonastery.com.